Hi guys. Tonight, we ease into a place where the air feels thick enough to hold in your hands, where fireflies blink like shy lanterns, and the ground beneath your feet squelches with a slow, gulping sound. You stand at the edge of a wide wetland as dusk leans down. The light softens into copper and violet, the way it always does before night creatures stir. You breathe in the smell of decaying leaves, wet bark, and something faintly sweet drifting from unseen blossoms. It is peaceful for the moment, and you can almost pretend the swamp is a cradle. Almost. Because then you hear it, that first whine of a mosquito slicing the air next to your ear. A warning. A reminder that yes, this place can cradle you, but it can also devour your patience. And if you wandered in here alone after dark, well, you probably would not survive this. Not without knowing a few tricks passed down by people who built their nights inside these wetlands long before electric lights or bug spray ever existed. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, let me know where you are watching from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, and you let your body ease a little as the story folds around you. You take your first slow step along the swamp edge. A narrow strip of semi-dry soil separates you from a world of reeds, tangled vines, and dark water reflecting the last streaks of day. The surface looks still, but you know it is not. Beneath it glide turtles and fish, and somewhere hidden in the plants a frog croaks with a low vibration that you feel more in your chest than your ears. You are entering a place where native communities once wove their nights with instinct, observation, and gentle practicality. The first thing you notice is the texture of the mud. It seems soft enough to swallow your feet, but you realize people trained from childhood to read this land would know exactly where to step. That is the mainstream historical fact settling over you as simply as the humid air. Indigenous families who lived near swamp regions studied the ground the way you might study a map. They knew which patches sank too quickly, which ones stayed firm through rainstorms, and which ones became high ground as waters shifted. You walk a few more paces and catch a faint scent of burning plant matter. You blink slowly, not in surprise, but in recognition. Nights in these wetlands were shaped by smoke, thin spirals rising from little mounds of smouldering leaves and bark. A quirky detail floats into your mind now, something people rarely talk about. Some communities used specific fungi or half-decayed logs that smoked steadily without bursting into flame. The smell was earthy and strange, but it did the job. It kept insects at a distance. It cloaked the camp in a protective haze, and it created a soft nighttime glow that felt almost like an invitation to sleep. You notice how the darkness spreads gently across the water. The sky above turns deep blue, then inkier still. A breeze lifts, moving the reeds like quiet dancers, and your eyes adjust to the shadows. The sensory richness of this place hits you. The chirring of insects, the distant plop of something slipping into water, the coolness of night forming a fine mist on your forearms. You draw a long breath and wonder how anyone could rest in such a place. But as you keep moving, you begin to understand. Sleep here was not a matter of shutting out the swamp. It was a matter of joining it, matching its rhythms, and learning that night offered safety as well as risk. A bat flickers overhead, swooping silently. You follow its path and then look back down toward a patch of higher dirt. It is almost imperceptible, just a small rise created by roots and layers of dried vegetation. But even that few inches of elevation can mean the difference between a tent that stays dry through the night and one that fills with cold water by sunrise. Historians still argue whether communities favored these near-invisible ridges for regular camps or whether they preferred to build temporary sleeping spots above ground on platforms more often than we realize. The debate continues partly because the materials used here, things like untreated wood and woven grasses, rarely survive long enough to tell their full story. You crouch and touch the damp soil. It gives slightly under your fingers, warm from the day but already cooling. You imagine generations who did the same, families mapping the land with touch and memory. Hunters returning at dusk, reading tiny shifts in moisture. Children learning that dry spots in the swamp are not always where they appear to be, and all of them settling into night with a calm that surprises you. A splash echoes not far away. You freeze only for a second, letting the sound settle. It could be a fish, could be a turtle rolling off a log, but there is also a quiet awareness here. You remember that many wetland regions held not just insects but larger animals lurking at the edges. People who slept in these environments learned to interpret distant water sounds as easily as city dwellers interpret traffic noise. A single heavy ripple might signal a wandering alligator. A rapid set of tiny splashes could mean otters playing. Over time, each sound lulls you, becomes part of a nighttime vocabulary. You straighten your back and take another slow step, letting yourself ease deeper into the atmosphere. The sky dims further, and a thin band of mist rises from the water. You inhale and taste the swamp on your lips. Minerals, wet roots, and that faint tang of decaying vegetation that somehow feels oddly comforting, like a blanket of scent covering everything. As you move forward, you sense the shift from evening to true night. Fireflies cluster in pockets of brightness. A night bird calls from somewhere unseen. Your clothes cling lightly to your skin, soaked with humidity, and with each step, you feel yourself melting into the rhythm of this place, not fighting its discomforts but settling into its truths. You picture a family arriving at this same moment of the evening long ago. They would unload baskets from canoes, set down bundles of reeds or woven mats, check the perimeter for animals, and begin preparing their smoky rings of protection. You imagine them moving with an easy confidence, every motion quiet and unfussy. They had no illusions about comfort. They created comfort by cooperating with the land. The last light disappears and the swamp becomes a world of sound and texture. The mud softens under your heel. A drifting mosquito buzzes close, but a passing breeze pushes it aside. Night gathers itself like a heavy blanket slipping over your shoulders. And as you stand here, letting the darkness hold you, you begin to understand why people could fall asleep in a place like this. The swamp is alive, yes, and unpredictable, but it is also steady in its own way. It repeats itself each night. It hums, it cools, it breathes, and you, feeling the warmth of lingering sunlight evaporating off your skin, start to breathe with it. This is where your journey into the sleeping world of the wetlands begins, where you learn how people closed their eyes under thick humidity, trusting the land not because it was safe, but because they knew how to live with it. You take one last breath of the night air, scented with smoke and water and crushed leaves, and you wait for what comes next. You move farther along the edge of the wetland, noticing how the ground shifts under your feet in slow, subtle gradients. At first, it all looks the same. Mud, reeds, tangled roots, dark puddles reflecting slivers of moonlight. But as your eyes adjust, you begin to see what experienced travelers would have recognized instantly. The land here is not flat. It tilts, curls, dips and rises in ways that only reveal themselves when the light is low and your steps grow deliberate. You feel how each footfall lands with a slightly different firmness. One moment your heel sinks deeper than expected. The next moment, the ground tightens beneath you, as if a hidden web of roots has chosen that exact spot to anchor itself more fiercely. This quiet shifting of elevation becomes the heart of your focus. A tiny rise, no taller than your ankle, could mean the difference between dry bedding and a midnight swamp bath. And so you slow down, letting your toes feel their way through the softness. That is where the mainstream historical fact nudges into your thoughts. Communities living in swampy regions often built their nights around micro-elevations, reading the terrain with a sensitivity modern hikers sometimes envy. They knew which patches stayed relatively dry even after storms, which ridges held firm beneath the weight of a sleeping family, and which dips would fill with water the moment the tide changed or a rain front rolled in. You breathe in deeply, letting the thick smell of wet grass settle at the back of your throat. You listen to the quiet slap of water against nearby logs. Every sound feels amplified, yet softened at the same time. The swamp seems to inhale with you. Somewhere in the near distance, a heron gives a low, moaning call, as if announcing that night has now fully taken shape. You crouch low, fingertips brushing the rough tops of dried grasses, forming a small mound. It looks insignificant, but the longer you study it, the more you understand. The blades here are firmer, arranged in a natural weave created by seasonal winds. Below them lies soil layered with decomposed vegetation that has settled over time, creating a slow-built pedestal rising just enough to keep bedding from soaking through. A family might place a woven mat here, maybe a reed cushion or a small bundle of moss fiber, turning this modest hut into a warm, dry nest. You picture how a sleeping body would feel on such a lift, supported, protected, and elevated just enough to forget the cold, wet ground beneath. A quirky detail drifts into your mind, something rarely mentioned in textbooks. Some indigenous groups in marshy regions reportedly use their bare feet as leveling tools. Before laying down bedding, an elder or skilled walker would shuffle in small circles on a chosen patch, feeling for firmness and listening for the faint shift of water beneath the soil. Their sense of balance became a kind of compass. Their souls could detect slight hollows where groundwater lurked, or tiny root networks that promised stability. It was not just instinct but a practiced skill, one that children absorbed by following adults through the wetlands long before they learned to paddle a canoe. A mosquito winds past your cheek, and you wave it away gently, more out of habit than urgency. You remember the smoky mounds from earlier, their soft spirals drifting upward. The scent of charred plants clings faintly to the air here too, meaning this place has probably been used for resting before. Human routines leave subtle traces even centuries later. Flattened reeds, clusters of brittle twigs arranged in ways only deliberate hands would choose. You step around them, mindful of how easily modern clumsiness could erase stories hidden in the soil. You straighten, rolling your shoulders back, and let your eyes wander across the swamp. The moon hangs low, filtered through strands of Spanish moss drooping from cypress branches. The reflection on the water shimmers with a silver so gentle it feels painted. The stillness around you deepens, yet you sense movement everywhere. Insects flicker. Fish swirl below the surface. Leaves sway with the invisible breath of warm currents rising from the wetlands. Your gaze settles again on the subtle lumps of higher ground. Some rise only 2 or 3 inches, just enough to create a safe sleeping pocket. Others form wider mounds, where multiple people could stretch out side by side. You feel the practical genius of turning these natural formations into nightly sanctuaries. It required patience and attention, not brute force. It meant working with the swamp rather than conquering it. But not all scholars agree on how consistently these micro-elevations were used. Historians still argue whether communities relied on natural rises more often than constructed platforms, or whether both options were chosen seasonally depending on tides and insect density. The evidence is patchy, the stories mostly oral, and the land itself has shifted too many times to leave decisive answers. You imagine them debating this over conference tables while the swamp outside holds its secrets with quiet amusement. You shift your weight again and feel a faint vibration under the ground, as if tiny pockets of air are rising through soaked roots. It is a sensation you would never notice in a dry forest or an open plain. But here every inch of soil feels alive, adjusting to the moon-pulled movement of water. You think about how a family traveling through these wetlands would pause at dusk, testing each step until they found the perfect height, the perfect firmness, the perfect harmony between land and night. Your clothes cling slightly from humidity, and yet the air feels cooler now. The faint breeze glides over the surface of the water, carrying hints of crushed vegetation and distant smoke. You imagine someone kneeling where you are, hundreds of years ago, pressing their palm to the earth, noting how quickly the moisture seeped in. Maybe they would murmur to another person, pointing to a nearby patch barely raised but dry enough. Maybe they would mark the spot with a reed or a small basket, so others arriving later could find it easily in the dark. You take a slow step onto a slightly higher patch, and the ground lifts under your arch in a way that reassures rather than alarms. This is where someone might have laid a sleeping mat. You picture a thin layer of woven reeds, softened by moss, topped with the faint fragrance of crushed herbs. Above, the stars would shimmer through canopy gaps. Around, the swamp would hum its eternal lullaby. You imagine the stillness that settles once the night reaches its darkest hour, when insects quiet briefly and even the frogs fall into momentary silence. Here in this small rise, you start to feel how sleep could become possible. The land holds you, not aggressively, but with a slow, gentle firmness. The swamp no longer feels threatening. It feels intimate. You hear the soft rustle of leaves overhead and think about how your breathing matches the rhythm of the wetlands without you trying. You step off the mound and keep walking, letting the terrain guide your senses. And now you know something important. The key to sleeping in a swamp begins with first finding the ground that sleeps too. It is a quiet truth you carry with you as you continue into the night, deeper into the world of people who once made these wetlands their cradle. You continue deeper into the wetlands as the moon glints across a slow, shimmering channel of water. The surface looks like liquid glass, so smooth that even the ripples travel lazily, as if they are half asleep already. You walk toward the sound of a hollow knock that echoes softly through the dark. It takes a moment to realize what it is. A canoe drifting gently against a wooden post, nudged by the faint motion of the swamp. The sound is steady and calming, a soft reminder that in places like this, water is not just a barrier, it is a mattress, a road, and sometimes a bedroom. Your footsteps soften as you step onto firmer mud near the waterline. Reeds whisper against your calves. A faint splash makes you glance sideways, but whatever creature caused it has already slipped back into invisible channels. You breathe in the cool breeze rolling across the swamp and notice the sweet scent of wet wood that has soaked in sun and water for seasons on end. This is where you learn why canoes were not only tools of travel but also platforms for sleep. Entire nights drifted along these silent waterways, resting far from the insect swarms that clung to vegetation on shore. You place a hand on the edge of the canoe and feel the smooth wood beneath your fingertips. It is surprisingly warm despite the night, as if holding on to every moment of daylight. A mainstream historical fact surfaces quietly in your thoughts. Many indigenous groups relied on dugout canoes carved from massive cypress or cottonwood trunks. The material was chosen not only for durability but also for buoyancy. These heavy boats rested low in the water, yet remained nearly impossible to flip accidentally. That stability made them ideal for nighttime resting when the ground was too wet or the insects too aggressive to tolerate. You lean closer and notice something else. A pair of poles sticking upright from the water on each side of the canoe. Together they create a narrow rectangle just wide enough for a platform. It looks simple, but your eyes adjust and reveal faint outlines of crossbars that once supported woven mats, canoe-side sleeping platforms. Elevated barely above the surface, they offered a place to lie down while letting the canoe act as anchor and pillow. You imagine slipping into that space, the water rocking you gently, the night breeze cooling your skin, and the mosquitoes drifting elsewhere, because smoke from a slow-burning ember pot would hang low over the water. A quirky detail rises to your mind, something rarely included in mainstream discussions. There are accounts of some communities placing smooth stones or shells in the bottom of the canoe to create a rhythmic tapping sound when water currents shifted. The pattern of the taps helped sleepers predict changes in tide or wake them gently if water levels rose too quickly. It acted like a natural alarm clock created by the swamp itself. You imagine lying there, eyes closed, drifting into sleep with the faint clink of stone on wood becoming part of your dream. You shift your weight and sit carefully on the edge of the canoe, feeling it move beneath you in a slow, rocking motion. It is a motion that makes your shoulders unclench instantly. You understand why people could sleep here. The water carries the weight of your body effortlessly. Your muscles loosen. Your spine relaxes. The swamp becomes a cradle again, just as it did at the edge of dusk. The moonlight reflects across the platform posts, turning them into slender silver columns rising from the dark. You reach out to touch one and feel how smooth it is near the top and rougher where water has worn it away. The posts were placed intentionally. Families anchored these structures in spots where the water remained calm even during wind shifts. They knew which channels were sheltered by trees, which bends of the swamp deflected waves, and which areas gave a steady view of stars for navigation if a sleeper happened to wake before dawn. But not everything about these platforms is clear to historians. Scholars still argue whether canoe-side platforms were used primarily by traveling hunting groups or whether entire families relied on them during certain seasons. Some believe they were more common during insect-heavy months, when sleeping above open water created a natural barrier from mosquitoes that hated crossing breezy channels. Others suggest they were used year-round in regions where the ground rarely dried enough to sleep on comfortably. The debates linger, drifting as quietly as the swamp mist rising around you. You tilt your head and listen to the water. It has a sound you cannot quite describe. Not a rush, not a splash, but a soft slurp of current passing through submerged grass. That gentle sound would have lulled many people to sleep across centuries. You imagine lying on the platform with your head near the canoe rim, feeling water move beneath you like a heartbeat. The breeze would brush against your cheeks, carrying distant scents of smoke, river mud, and flowering vines. Fireflies might drift overhead, blinking softly like stars that lost their way. You step carefully onto the narrow frame of the platform, testing its firmness. Even after all this time, the design feels intuitive. The crossbars distribute weight evenly so that your foot does not sink or wobble. You lower yourself into a crouch and then slowly sit, letting your legs dangle over the water. The coolness surprises you. It feels alive against your skin, whispering upward through the humid night. You close your eyes briefly and imagine what it felt like to drift half asleep on a night like this. A family might cradle infants in small reed baskets set inside the canoe. Older children might fall asleep to the murmur of adults whispering about tomorrow's tasks. Someone might hum softly, a tune carried over generations. The platform might sway just enough to remind everyone that the swamp was always moving, even while they rested. You open your eyes and notice something else. A small clay bowl rests near one of the posts. The ashes inside it tell a story. It once held slow-burning embers that created thin smoke drifting low across the water. That smoke acted as a shield, not only against mosquitoes but also against the humidity that settled too heavily at ground level. You can almost smell its ghost now, earthy, bitter, strangely comforting. You run your fingers gently across the surface of the bowl. The texture is uneven, handmade, organic. Its shape is slightly lopsided. But you know that small imperfections did not matter. The swamp corrected everything. Smoke drifted where it needed to drift. Water rocked where it needed to rock. Sleep found its way to anyone willing to trust the rhythm. You rise carefully from the platform and step back onto the muddy bank. Your feet sink slightly before finding firmer soil. You look at the canoe again, at the gentle shine of moonlight across its curved body. It feels like an old friend now, reliable, steady, and quietly wise. You imagine people over countless nights tying their canoes loosely to posts, placing mats on platforms, arranging baskets, smoothing fibers, and preparing to sleep over quiet water. Behind you, a frog croaks, low and resonant. Another answers from farther away. The call bounces across the swamp as if marking the transition from alertness to rest. You take a slow breath and let your shoulders fall. The night feels alive but peaceful, heavy but soothing. You understand that this canoe-side world was a solution born from observation and patience, shaped by people who learned to rest not in spite of the swamp, but with the swamp. The water glimmers once more before a cloud drifts over the moon. In that dimming light, you walk forward smoothly, leaving the canoe to rock gently behind you. The night deepens, and your understanding of sleep in this place deepens with it. You step softly into the next part of the wetlands, carrying the memory of water cradling you like a quiet, ancient bed. You walk along the narrow line where water meets soil, feeling the temperature shift again. The night thickens, but the air becomes lighter the closer you move toward a faint glow rising from a cluster of low, smouldering fires. The scent reaches you before you see the sources clearly. It is a soft, woody aroma mixed with the faint sharpness of crushed leaves, the kind of smell that lingers in hair and fabric long after a camp has packed up. It makes the mosquitoes falter slightly, their buzzing drifting farther away in uneven spirals, as if they cannot quite decide whether to stay or flee. You step closer and see the small mounds arranged in a loose circle. They look simple, just bundles of damp plant material set on coals, releasing curling ribbons of pale smoke. But the arrangement is deliberate. Each mound smoulders, not burns, creating a ring of haze that surrounds the sleeping space without choking anyone inside it. The smoke moves at just the right height, drifting horizontally like a lazy cloud that refuses to rise or fall. It is here you start to understand how people sleeping in these wetlands manage to carve out pockets of comfort in landscapes otherwise dominated by insects. You crouch near one of the mounds and study the materials. Inside, half-decayed bark rests alongside twisted stalks of aromatic plants. The texture is fibrous, soft, and just moist enough to produce steady smoke without bursting into flame. A detail that survives in oral tradition suggests that certain groups used the inner bark of trees like cypress or willow, mixed with dried swamp grasses and, occasionally, the leftover crumbs of resinous roots. These ingredients created a smoke that not only repelled mosquitoes, but also reduced the heavy humidity hovering near the ground. You inhale gently, letting the scent settle at the back of your throat. It is earthy, slightly sweet, and strangely calming. You picture people lying down beside these smoke mounds, their bodies stretched out on mats, faces half illuminated by the dim orange glow. Sleep here was not silent. It hummed with insects, echoed with frogs, and breathed with the swamp. But this smoke ring made that world gentler, creating a boundary between humans and the relentless buzz of night. A curious detail filters into your mind, one mentioned in old travel accounts but rarely repeated today. Some families reportedly added tiny pieces of dried fungus to these smouldering piles. The fungus did not burn. It produced a slow, pale smoke that carried farther than ordinary plant matter. Observers described the scent as oddly sweet and almost metallic, like something from deep in the forest. It may have had spiritual significance for some groups, or simply practical value, but its use adds a subtle layer to the ingenuity woven into nocturnal life in the wetlands. You run your fingers along a charred branch, feeling how easily it flakes apart. Smoke rises gently into your face. And you blink slowly, letting your eyes adjust to the shifting haze. The camp around you feels alive and quiet at the same time. The smoke softens everything, making shadows blur and sounds thicken. You understand why people would feel safe sleeping within these rings. The world outside becomes distant, softened by mist, while the circle itself becomes a warm, protected cocoon. A curious detail filters into your mind, one mentioned in old travel accounts but rarely repeated today. Some families reportedly added tiny pieces of dried fungus to these smouldering piles. The fungus did not burn. It produced a slow, pale smoke that carried farther than ordinary plant matter. Observers described the scent as oddly sweet and almost metallic, like something from deep in the forest. You imagine an elder checking the mounds before sleep, adding or removing small pieces until the smoke drifted exactly as needed, slow and steady, never too thick. But there is an interesting uncertainty woven into this practice. Some modern researchers disagree on how widespread these smoke rings were. A number of them believe that every wetland community relied on similar techniques, while others argue that only certain groups depended on the method heavily. They point out that environmental variations across swamp systems would have shaped different nightly solutions. The lack of preserved organic material leaves room for interpretation, and so the academic conversation drifts as fluidly as the smoke itself. You picture them debating this in rooms far away from the swamp, while the night here continues with quiet confidence, unconcerned with modern speculation. You rise slowly and walk along the perimeter of the smoke ring. The temperature here feels different. The air is warm near the coals, cool at your back, and comfortably balanced under the haze. The mosquitoes still exist, but they hover farther away, like faint annoyances rather than a cloud of misery. You feel a strange gratitude toward the ingenuity of the people who learned to coax these plants into gentle protection. Your feet sink softly into the damp earth as you move closer to the center of the ring. You see where mats would have been laid out. Some resting spots look large enough for 2 or 3 people. Others are small, suited for a single sleeper or a young child curled up with knees drawn in. You picture them lying on their sides, listening to the low chorus of frogs mixed with the soft crackle of coals. Perhaps someone whispers a story. Perhaps a dog curls at the edge of the smoke ring. Perhaps a parent checks on a baby and touches its forehead with cool fingers. You lower yourself to the ground and sit beside a patch where the soil is still faintly dry. The smoke washes over you in a soft wave. Your muscles loosen without you meaning to relax them. You realize the plants used in these mounds created not just physical protection but emotional comfort. The scent becomes a lullaby, one that covers the night's sharper edges with a soothing veil. You glance up and notice how the smoke behaves near the treetops. It rises, thins, and then spreads horizontally, creating a pale halo under the branches. The leaves shimmer slightly as it brushes past them. Some drip condensation, others hang still, motionless in the thick air. The moon above loses some of its intensity through the haze, giving the night a muted, velvety color. You shift your gaze toward the open water beyond the ring. The surface glimmers with reflected light, but the smoke line marks a boundary that feels almost sacred. Outside the circle lie the wild sounds of the swamp. Inside lies the gentle hum of controlled fire. The contrast is subtle but profound. You think about the people who once tended these fires, the patience required, the experience passed down, the trial and error that must have gone into perfecting which plants burned, at which rates. There is comfort in knowing that humans across history found ways to work with nature rather than against it, even in environments as demanding as mosquito-filled wetlands. You lie back slowly, letting the soft earth cushion you. The smoke drifts overhead. The night hums softly. Your breathing matches its rhythm. You feel as though the swamp is wrapping you in a long, fragrant exhale. And as you settle into this quiet moment, you understand another truth. Sleep in the wetlands did not rely on shutting out discomfort. It relied on transforming discomfort into harmony. It relied on shifting the balance until night felt like a companion rather than an adversary. The smoke ring continues its slow drift. The coals glow. The swamp whispers. And you rise, ready to follow the path to the next place where sleep was crafted with equal intention and care. You move past the last curl of smoke until the air clears again, warm and sticky against your skin. Ahead of you, the light shifts. Moonbeams filter through broad leaves that glisten with moisture, and the entire swamp floor seems to brighten in soft, muted patches. You step beneath a cluster of trees where enormous palm fronds fan outward like welcoming hands. They rustle gently when the breeze arrives, brushing against each other with a whisper as delicate as silk sliding over wood. It is here that you begin to notice an art older than many of the stories whispered around night fires. The art of turning these broad, shimmering leaves into shelters that protect sleepers from rain, insects, wind, and the restlessness of the night. You walk forward with slow steps, your toes sinking into the damp soil as the fronds surround you. In the dim glow, you see layers of them arranged by careful hands, overlapping like scales on a fish. Each leaf rests slightly over another, forming a canopy that channels water downward in clean, deliberate lines. The simplicity and efficiency strike you immediately. No rope, no nails, just fibers woven together in patterns passed through generations. A detail widely recognized across ethnographic records suggests that certain wetland communities favored palm frond shelters because they could be assembled quickly and dismantled just as easily. The leaves were already shaped like shingles. The only requirement was knowing how to weave their tough stems into a lattice strong enough to hold through a storm. You crouch down and feel the underside of one frond. It is cool, surprisingly smooth, and faintly waxy. When pressed together in layers, they create a barrier both breathable and water-resistant, allowing sleepers to rest without feeling trapped or suffocated in the heavy air. You lift your gaze and examine the structure again. The design is not rigid. It curves gently, following the natural arc of the leaves. The shelter looks alive, almost growing out of the landscape instead of being imposed upon it. A curious historical note flickers into your thoughts, something mentioned in the journals of early travelers who wandered into wetland territories. They described how palm frond shelters were often so well woven that even after the camp had moved on, the shelters sometimes remained upright for weeks. Animals occasionally used them afterward, curling beneath the fronds during rainstorms or nesting in the gaps between old fibers. The idea makes you smile. Even long after people left, the shelters continued to offer refuge. You step inside the structure. The moment you do, the sound outside softens. The humidity changes too. The air inside feels warmer, but less turbulent, as if the fronds scoop the swamp's breath into one gentle, steady exhale. You crouch and touch the floor beneath the shelter. A layer of dried leaves and woven mats lies there, faintly crackling under your fingers. The scent of old vegetation mingles with the faint perfume of crushed palm. It is soothing, like the scent of a warm attic filled with wooden treasures. The longer you sit there, the more you notice the subtle craftsmanship. The fronds are angled downward, just enough to direct rain away from the sleeping space. The sides are left partially open, allowing airflow to keep the space from becoming stifling. A soft patch of moonlight spills through one of the gaps, casting patterned shadows that sway with each breeze. You imagine waking up to shadows like these, shifting gently like water ripples projected onto the walls of a dream. You step inside the structure. The moment you do, the sound outside softens. The humidity changes too. The air inside feels warmer, but less turbulent, as if the fronds scoop the swamp's breath into one gentle, steady exhale. You crouch and touch the floor beneath the shelter. A layer of dried leaves and woven mats lies there, faintly crackling under your fingers. The scent of old vegetation mingles with the faint perfume of crushed palm. You shift your weight and trace the length of a frond with your fingertips. It feels cool and steady. The stem is stiff yet flexible, strong enough to bend without snapping. You realize how these shelters achieved comfort not through complexity but through cooperation with nature's design. Fronds were simply guided, not forced. Their natural curvature became the roof. Their stem strength became the beams. Their softness became the insulation. You take a slow breath and notice the sound of rain beginning somewhere in the distance. It is faint at first, like thousands of fingertips tapping on hollow wood. The storm drifts closer with each passing moment, but in the shelter you remain calm. You want to see how it handles the rain. A few large drops hit the outer leaves with steady thumps. The fronds flex but do not buckle. Water channels downward along the veins of the leaves, dripping neatly to the ground at the edges. You tilt your head upward, watching the patterns dance overhead. The roof becomes alive with movement, the droplets racing along invisible paths. Sleepers beneath this kind of shelter would have remained dry, comforted by the steady rhythm of rain overhead. You imagine lying down here, wrapped in a blanket of soft woven fiber, drifting into slumber while the elements were kept at just the right distance. In academic circles, there has been some lively discussion about how permanent these shelters typically were. Some researchers propose that families reused them during seasonal migrations, returning to favored spots and repairing the fronds as needed. Others argue that most shelters were meant to be temporary, lasting only a few nights before being abandoned for fresh construction elsewhere. The landscape itself changed constantly, shaped by tides, storms, and shifting animal patterns. Because so little physical evidence remains, the specifics continue to invite interpretation. You settle your back against a supporting beam of bundled branches and let your gaze soften. The smell of rain on outer leaves fills your senses. It is sweet, slightly earthy, and threaded with the coolness of moving air. You close your eyes for a moment and picture a family settling here long before your arrival. Perhaps a parent smooths a mat for a child. Perhaps someone hums softly to coax a toddler to rest. Perhaps another shapes fronds into a fan to stir the air gently before sleep. You imagine waking in the middle of the night to the soft percussion of raindrops. The shelter would feel warm and steady, its leafy roof absorbing the noise into a soothing lullaby. The humidity would cling to your skin, but the airflow through the gaps would keep the heaviness from becoming overwhelming. You might hear a nightbird call or the ripple of water from a startled fish. You would roll onto your side, cocooned by your mat, and fall back asleep knowing the shelter was doing exactly what it was built to do. When the rain softens, you step back outside. The air feels newly washed, refreshed. The fronds drip with moonlit beads of water that glimmer like tiny crystals. You take one last look at the shelter and admire again how quietly it coexists with the swamp. It does not fight the environment or stand apart from it. It blends, breathes, and invites sleep into a place where rest should be difficult yet somehow becomes effortless. You move forward, feeling the damp ground cool beneath your soles. The frogs resume their nighttime chorus. The sky clears slightly, revealing stars trembling above the treetops. Another pocket of sleeping wisdom waits for you ahead, and you follow its pull deeper into the swamp's gentle, living night. You follow the faint trail leading away from the palm frond shelter, the air growing noticeably cooler as the ground shifts again beneath your feet. The swamp carries a new scent here, something denser and earthier, like a mixture of wet clay, crushed roots, and distant wood smoke. You pause, crouching low to feel the soil with your fingertips. It is smooth and cool, the texture changing from loose mud to a more compact, velvety layer that seems to hold the night's chill inside it. This is where another unexpected sleeping tool reveals itself, one that feels almost counterintuitive until you feel it with your own hands, the quiet comfort of mud-cool bedding layers. You run your palm across the surface and feel how the heat of the day has already slipped away, replaced by a soothing coolness. It surprises you how pleasant it feels. You press a little harder and feel the mud flex slightly, firm enough to hold weight but soft enough to mold to the body. A well-known observation found in several regional traditions notes that communities learned to prepare specific patches of mud for nighttime rest. These mud layers were not the usual swamp slop, but carefully chosen mixtures of clay, silt, and plant fiber that held their shape even on humid nights. You picture people smoothing the surface with flat stones or woven paddles, creating a bed that breathed differently than fabric or woven mats. As you trail your fingertips across the surface, a faint mineral smell drifts upward. It is cool, grounding, almost hypnotic. You shift your weight and kneel beside the mud layer, noticing how the temperature calms your skin. In places where the heat lingered too long after sunset, these cool patches offered a relief that wood, reed, or moss could not always match. The mud moderated the warmth of the night, keeping sleepers from feeling suffocated by the humidity. Your gaze catches a faint pattern pressed into the surface. It looks like a subtle weave, perhaps the leftover mark of a basket or a mat that once lay here. You imagine someone smoothing this mud as dusk approached, shaping it into a shallow depression that fitted their body perfectly. A simple, ancient form of ergonomic bedding. The idea feels strangely modern and yet completely natural here. A more unusual detail whispered in a handful of regional accounts comes to mind. Sometimes people added fine ash from certain plants to their mud bedding. The ash helped repel insects, reduced the slickness of the surface, and added a faint grey tint that made the layer look like soft stone. Some travelers described these beds as feeling like cool ceramic slabs when the humidity dropped, yet remaining pliable enough to offer comfort. You picture someone sprinkling the ash, mixing it gently with fingers before smoothing it into shape. You settle lower, resting your hand fully on the surface. The mud absorbs warmth from your skin instantly, creating a soothing contrast. You understand why many sleepers found comfort here. Ground temperature can steady the body, especially in climates where heat and moisture cling like invisible blankets. The swamp embraced people, but the mud grounded them. You shift your position and sit with one leg extended, the other bent. From here, you can see the faint glow of moonlight spreading across the mud layer, turning it into a sheet of muted silver. It reflects light in a soft, matte way, unlike the glossy shimmer of water. When breezes pass, the surface seems to darken momentarily, as if breathing with the night. You picture a family preparing for rest. Someone checks the mud for firmness. Another fans insects away with a branch. A child presses their hand into the surface with delighted curiosity, leaving a pattern that will vanish by morning. Bedding in the swamps often required this kind of cooperation. It was not something prepared far in advance. It was shaped in the moment, responding to the weather, the humidity, the insects, and the needs of whoever would sleep there. You lean forward, tracing the faint border where the mud layer transitions back into regular soil. The shift is so subtle you could miss it in the dark, yet the prepared section is unmistakably different once you feel it. Its texture is refined, deliberately smoothed, intentionally sculpted. That level of attention reveals how deeply connected people were to the environment. They did not simply endure the swamp. They learned its patterns and worked with them creatively. The night deepens around you, the chorus of insects rising into a rhythmic hiss. A frog croaks, its voice echoing from the edge of the water. Leaves rustle as small creatures move through the underbrush. And yet, here on this cooled bed of mud, those sounds feel distant, softened. You imagine the sensation of lying here with your back sinking just slightly into the surface, your body cooling naturally, the night air brushing past your face. In discussions about sleeping practices in humid wetlands, some researchers have offered differing interpretations of how common these mud layers were. A few suggest they were used frequently during hotter months, particularly when smoke rings and elevated platforms became too warm or crowded. Others propose they were preferred by certain families or individuals who found comfort in the mud's ability to regulate temperature. With organic evidence nearly impossible to preserve, explanations remain open to interpretation, and the details continue to invite further study. You lower yourself gently until your knees touch the edge of the mud layer. Your palms press slowly into the surface. The mud spreads slightly beneath your weight, then settles again in a surprisingly even way. It holds you without swallowing you. You feel the soft resistance and the gradual warmth transfer from your skin into the earth. The moon drifts behind a thin veil of clouds, dimming the swamp into a softer shade of darkness. You breathe in, letting the scent of clay and plants fill your chest. The mud beneath you feels like a natural cooling blanket spreading outward in a slow wave. You imagine lying fully on your back here, the night thick around you, the coolness balancing the weight of the air, the soft mud preventing sharp roots or stones from pressing into your skin. You shift your hand again, and notice the faint vibration of insects moving somewhere beneath the surface. The mud dampens the sensation so thoroughly that it becomes almost soothing, like distant purr from the ground. You run your fingertips along a ridge that someone once smoothed deliberately, perhaps shaping it to support their neck or shoulder. The marks are faint now, but the intention remains. You picture the early hours of dawn finding sleepers resting peacefully here. The mud would still be cool, though slightly warmed by their bodies. Mist rising from the water would drift across the ground, brushing their faces with gentle dampness. Birds would call softly from the treetops, and for a few moments, the entire swamp would feel hushed, balanced, suspended between night and day. You rise slowly, brushing your palms together even though the mud barely clings. The smoothness of your skin surprises you, as if the minerals have left a faint sheen. You step away from the bed, feeling the coolness linger in your hands. A breeze stirs the reeds. A soft rustle moves through the trees. The swamp feels alive in a quieter, deeper way now. You take one last look at the mud layer, admiring the ingenuity behind something so simple. Cooling, supportive, insect-resistant, easy to shape, and always available. You feel a new appreciation for the practical creativity woven into nightly routines here. And with that understanding, you step forward once more, ready to uncover the next form of rest hidden within the wild, humming heart of the wetlands. You walk deeper into the swamp where the trees grow taller and lean closer together, their branches knitting into silhouettes that seem to cradle the night sky. The air thickens around you, dense with the fragrance of moss, damp bark, and that faint sweetness rising from unseen blossoms. Your steps soften as the ground grows spongier beneath your feet, the soil taking on a springy resilience that makes each footfall feel oddly cushioned. You pause to let your eyes adjust to the shifting textures, because somewhere in this shaded pocket of the wetlands lies one of the most elegant sleeping inventions to emerge from swamp life. The moss hammock stretched above the soggiest ground like a floating cradle of softness. You run your fingers along a curtain of hanging moss nearby, feeling how its threads cling lightly and then release, airy and silky like nature's version of cotton. The strands sway with even the slightest breeze, brushing your wrist with cool moisture. You look upward and spot two sturdy trees standing close enough that their trunks form a natural frame. Between them hangs something that resembles an oversized net, woven from a mix of moss, bark, fiber, and flexible vines. You pause to let your eyes adjust to the shifting textures, because somewhere in this shaded pocket of the wetlands lies one of the most elegant sleeping inventions to emerge from swamp life. The moss hammock stretched above the soggiest ground like a floating cradle of softness. You step closer, admiring how the hammock blends almost seamlessly with its surroundings. It looks like part of the forest itself, as if the trees decided to create a resting place. A description preserved in several early accounts notes that some coastal and wetland groups crafted hammocks by twisting long ropes of fiber taken from inner tree bark. These ropes were then interlaced with layers of moss, giving the hammock both softness and structure. The moss absorbed sweat, cooled the body, and repelled certain insects that disliked its scent. The result was a suspended bed that kept sleepers entirely off the damp ground. You touch the hammock gently, and it sways with a slow, graceful movement. The texture surprises you. The bark fiber gives it strength, but the moss adds a cushion so plush it feels like a natural mattress. You imagine lying there with your back sinking slightly into the woven cradle, surrounded by the quiet chorus of frogs and the distant rush of breeze through leaves. A delightful detail mentioned in a handful of regional stories slips into your thoughts. Some hammock makers placed small clumps of aromatic plants within the weave, especially near the head area. These little bundles released subtle scents at night, combining the smell of moss with hints of mint or wild citrus. Not strong enough to overwhelm the senses, but present enough to make the air feel fresher as sleepers drifted into slumber. You can almost smell it now, a cool whisper of fragrance blending with the earthy dampness around you. You grip the vine ropes supporting the hammock and notice how expertly they are tied. The knots look simple, but the tension is perfectly balanced. Each vine stretches diagonally, distributing weight across the structure so no section droops more than another. You feel the harmony between the hammock and the trees holding it. When the breeze moves through the canopy, the hammock sways ever so slightly, as if breathing with the forest. You sit at the edge of the hammock carefully, testing the give. It responds smoothly, dipping just enough to hold your weight and then settling into a steady cradle. From this angle, you notice how the hammock's shape naturally inclines the body slightly, preventing the discomfort of twisting or rolling. It is a design born not from trial and error alone, but from close observation of how people naturally rest. Your feet dangle just above the wet ground. Below them, the flooded earth shifts with tiny ripples, disturbed by unseen creatures moving beneath the surface. But here in the hammock, you are separated from all of it. The elevation keeps the colder dampness away from your bones, and the airflow cools your skin. You understand instantly why such hammocks were treasured in hot, swampy seasons when the air near the ground felt too heavy to endure. Discussions among modern researchers present different interpretations of how these hammocks were used. Some scholars suggest that they were primarily nighttime bedding, used regularly and crafted with care. Others argue that they served as temporary rest spots during hunting or foraging trips, especially in areas where the ground remained flooded year-round. Because the materials decay so quickly, physical evidence rarely survives long enough to tell a complete story, leaving room for multiple perspectives. You lean back further, letting the hammock cradle your shoulders. The woven moss rustles softly beneath your weight. The night air cools your face, carrying the subtle chill rising from the water below. Overhead, branches sway slowly in the wind, their leaves creating a whispering sound that feels like a lullaby. The combination of mossy scent, slow rocking, and soft humidity turns the swamp into a gentle cocoon of movement and sound. You imagine a family settling into hammocks like this one. Children might sway lightly, giggling until the night's calm overtakes them. Adults might adjust their positions, using blankets woven from plant fiber or animal hide. Someone might tie a small basket nearby, holding tools or food within reach. You picture them drifting into sleep together, suspended above the unpredictable ground, trusting the craftsmanship of their hammocks and the strength of the trees supporting them. The hammock gently rocks as you shift your body. Each motion carries a sense of slow reassurance. Insects buzz in the distance, but seem less intrusive here, perhaps discouraged by the airflow rising through the suspended bed. The moss beneath you feels cool and plush, molding to your shape. You breathe in deeply, letting the stability and softness wash over your senses. Your gaze drifts upward to the canopy. The moonlight filters through in fractured beams, illuminating drifting patches of mist. For a moment, everything slows. The water below makes soft, bubbling noises. A night bird calls from somewhere behind you. The hammock sways with the lightest breeze, lifting and lowering your body as gently as if someone were rocking you to sleep. You swing your legs over the side slowly and stand beside the hammock once more. You brush stray moss from your hands, noticing how even that small contact leaves your skin scented with a cool, woody fragrance. You take a deep breath and let your eyes linger on the hammock. Its purpose is clear. Its elegance is undeniable. It is a testament to the creativity and harmony people forged with their environment. The swamp hums softly again as you take your next step forward. You carry with you the memory of a bed that floats above the earth, woven from moss and patience, offering rest in a place that never truly sleeps. Ahead, another style of bedding waits, shaped by the reeds and water that define this wild, whispering landscape. You leave the soft sway of the moss hammock behind, stepping into a stretch of swamp where the reeds grow thick and tall, their slender bodies rising from the water like thousands of quiet sentinels. They rustle gently with every breeze, brushing lightly against each other, producing a soft, shivering sound that follows you as you walk. The moon catches along their glossy surfaces, creating silver streaks that ripple whenever the wind stirs. This is the place where another form of nighttime comfort took shape, a kind of bedding so light, so portable, and so well adapted to wetland travel that it became a quiet companion on many long nights in the swamp. The reed mat sleep technology, crafted from the very plants you see now swaying around you. You bend down to touch one of the reeds. Its stalk feels firm at the base and slightly flexible near the top. When you move your fingers upward, it bends with an easy, smooth resistance. A widely accepted detail among cultural historians notes that these reeds, when harvested young and dried properly, could be split into long, flat strips without splintering. Once braided and woven together, they created mats surprisingly resilient for their weight. You picture a skilled weaver sitting by the water, twisting the first few strands into a pattern that would soon expand into a flat, supportive sleeping surface. You walk deeper into the reed bed until you reach a small clearing near the water's edge. There on the ground rests a partially rolled mat, its edges curled slightly from age. You kneel beside it and unroll it slowly. The reed strips click faintly against one another, creating a soft rhythm that seems to echo the texture of the swamp itself. The mat unfurls into a surprisingly smooth panel, its surface both firm and flexible. You run your palm across it and feel the faint pattern of the weave. It is cool from the night air, yet dry enough for comfort. A small practical insight preserved in early observations comes to mind. People often carried several reed mats rolled tightly and secured with strips of bark or vine. Some mats served as bedding, others as rain covers, food preparation surfaces, or even makeshift walls when arranged against leaning poles. Their versatility made them essential in landscapes where the ground changed character from hour to hour. You imagine a family laying mats down over damp soil, creating a temporary floor that separated them from mud, crawling insects, and the cold wetness that seeped upward from the earth. You lean closer and lift one edge of the mat. It is astonishingly light. Even with multiple layers of weaving, it feels like something that could be carried across miles without much effort. Travelers would roll mats into bundles thicker than a forearm, tuck them under canoes, tie them to carrying poles, or stack them inside baskets. Their portability made them especially useful for groups moving between seasonal camps or following the migration of fish and game across the wetlands. You smooth your hand along the mat again and notice tiny markings in the weave. They look like decorative knots, or perhaps small reinforcements placed at stress points. A lesser-known detail that surfaces in oral histories suggests that some weavers incorporated occasional strands of tougher fiber harvested from particular vine species. These tougher fibers prevented the mat from warping under humidity or sagging after repeated use. It is a quiet reminder that craftsmanship here involved both artistry and practical problem-solving. You sit on the mat and feel it adjust beneath you. It spreads your weight evenly and offers just enough cushioning to soften the pressure of the ground. You imagine lying down on a night like this, your body fully supported by the woven surface. The dampness of the swamp would press upward through the soil, but the mat would shield you, allowing air to circulate beneath your back. This balance between support and breathability mattered deeply in hot, humid climates where sleeping directly on vegetation or cloth often trapped heat. You tilt your head back and watch the tops of the reeds sway overhead. Their silhouettes blend with the sky, turning into a dance of thin shadows moving gently across the stars. A faint hum rises around you as insects gather, but the mat gives you a sense of separation, a small barrier between you and the restless world beneath. You close your eyes briefly and imagine the mat warming slightly from your body heat, softening its texture while keeping its shape. Nearby, a few unused reeds lie bundled on the ground. Their ends are trimmed cleanly, indicating deliberate harvesting. These leftover reeds offer another layer of insight into the bedding process. Gatherers often chose reeds from specific areas where water flow encouraged tall, straight growth. They preferred reeds with consistent thickness, which made weaving easier and produced a more even texture. A single skilled weaver could create a basic sleeping mat in a few hours, though larger or more intricate versions might take much longer. As you rest your hands on your knees, you remember that scholarly interpretations of reed mat use vary depending on region and season. Some researchers believe that mats were the primary bedding for many swamp communities during the warmer months, especially when raised platforms or hammocks were impractical. Others propose that mats served mostly as supplementary layers, combined with moss, grass, or animal hide on colder nights. The scarcity of surviving mats makes it challenging to form definitive conclusions, leaving room for multiple possibilities and interpretations. You stretch your legs and lie down fully upon the mat. The surface supports your spine in a gentle arc. The reeds shift just enough to cradle the back of your hips and shoulders without digging in. The mat feels surprisingly cool at first, but then settles into a pleasant neutrality, neither too warm nor too cold. The reeds nearest your cheek release a faint grassy scent, clean and soothing. You imagine people drifting into sleep with that same scent filling their noses, a smell that carried memories of the day's harvest and the soft rustling of reeds in the afternoon breeze. Above you, the stars shimmer in scattered patterns, visible through breaks in the canopy. The soft hiss of wind moving through the reeds becomes a natural lullaby. The swamp, which earlier felt wild and immense, now feels intimate, wrapping around you in gentle waves of sound. You picture adults lying side by side on mats like this one, children curled nearby, baskets of food or tools stacked within reach. Perhaps someone whispers a final story before sleep takes hold. Perhaps someone listens to the slow rhythm of water until dreams rise like mist around them. You sit up again, slowly rolling the mat halfway before letting it fall open one more time. The simplicity of the design strikes you once more. Straight lines, repeated patterns, durable fibers. No wasted material. Everything chosen with intention. You appreciate how the mat transforms the swamp from a place of unpredictable footing to a resting ground that feels almost civilized, almost cozy. You roll the mat fully this time, imagining the ease with which travelers could tuck it under their arm. You brush a few stray reed strips from your hands and stand, letting the mat settle back onto the earth. It rests there quietly, blending into the landscape, just another layer of the swamp, designed not by nature but by hands that understood the swamp's needs and its rhythms. As you step away from the mat and back into the thick reeds, the whispering sound returns, surrounding you in a soft envelope of movement. The swamp shifts again around you, guiding you toward the next piece of nocturnal wisdom waiting deeper in the night. You walk away from the reed mats, feeling the ground grow softer again, each step sinking into the hush of night. The swamp darkens here, not from clouds or trees, but from a deepening stillness that seems to fold itself around you. The air shifts, cooler and thicker, carrying the faint metallic scent of water pooled in deep pockets. You pause, listening. The hum of insects lowers, replaced by a more delicate layer of sound, distant splashes, soft cracks of branches, and the tiny ripples of creatures moving unseen through the water. This is the realm where nighttime instincts guided generations, teaching sleepers to read the signs of animals long before they settled down to rest. You take a slow breath and tune your senses to the subtleties around you. The swamp is full of clues if you know how to listen. People who lived here read these signs like a nightly language. A detail often mentioned in traditional narratives describes how families learned which animal sounds signaled safety and which signaled danger. A single splash from a fish meant nothing. A heavy plunge from deeper water could mark the movement of something larger. A series of fast, light scrapes might reveal a raccoon searching for food. You begin to notice how each sound has its own weight and meaning. The hum of insects lowers, replaced by a more delicate layer of sound, distant splashes, soft cracks of branches, and the tiny ripples of creatures moving unseen through the water. This is the realm where nighttime instincts guided generations, teaching sleepers to read the signs of animals long before they settled down to rest. Areas with fresh prints of certain animals were considered safe because they indicated a predictable, familiar pattern. But if an area showed unusual disturbances or tracks from larger predators, families would choose a different place for the night. You kneel beside a shallow pool where the mud is thick and dark. A faint trail of prints curves along the edge, catching the moonlight. They look small at first, but when you brush your fingertips over them, you feel the precise angles left behind by webbed toes, probably a water bird, moving through earlier in the evening. The mud around the tracks has dried slightly, which tells you the bird passed before dusk. You imagine people using tracks like these to choose their sleeping spots. You stand and walk a few paces until the sound of water shifts again. A gentle swirl breaks the surface near a small cluster of reeds. You hold still, watching the dark circle widen. Something moved beneath the water. Not urgently, not aggressively, but with the slow, purposeful motion of a creature comfortable in this environment. You take another step and feel a slight vibration in the ground. It is faint, barely noticeable, but the sensation travels upward through your legs. A small animal runs through nearby vegetation, snapping thin twigs as it moves. You do not see it, but you hear the tiny rhythm of its passage. In the old days, listeners would identify the species from that rhythm alone. A fast, erratic scramble meant a frightened rodent. A slow, deliberate rustle could mean an opossum. A pattern with intermittent pauses often marked a fox. Each sound held meaning that influenced nighttime decisions. A lesser-known detail that appears in a few surviving accounts suggests that some communities intentionally stirred small sections of mud near their camp at dusk. By observing how animal prints appeared overnight, they learned not only which creatures lived nearby, but also how active they were during certain hours. This helped determine whether the chosen sleeping spot was safe enough, or if the group should shift a few meters to avoid being in the path of a wandering predator. You continue walking until you reach an area where the scent of animal musk lingers faintly on the air. It is not overwhelming, just a trace carried on the breeze. The smell makes you pause. You imagine how experienced travelers could identify that scent instantly and decide whether it belonged to a harmless forager or something more imposing. Reading the swamp required not only awareness of sound and sight, but also a sharp sense of smell. Even in darkness, scent told stories. The moon shifts again, sliding behind a cluster of clouds, and the swamp grows darker still. You feel your senses heighten as vision recedes. The night brings a kind of clarity that daytime never offers. When you cannot rely on sight, you rely on everything else. You start to pick apart faint noises layered around you, the slight suction sound of mud releasing a creature's footstep, the soft splash of something slipping off a log, the distant croak of a frog that seems to echo oddly through the trees. Debates among modern researchers often revolve around how systematic these nighttime observations were. Some believe families trained children deliberately, turning the recognition of animal signs into nightly lessons. Others argue that much of this skill developed naturally through frequent exposure and intuition rather than structured teaching. Without written records, the full picture remains open to interpretation, though the consistency of such stories across regions suggests the practice held deep cultural value. You crouch low near a cluster of reeds where the water narrows into a channel. The mud here carries recent impressions, fresh depressions shaped by small pores, deeper ones likely left by a deer, and faint, thin lines that could be the sweep of a snake's passage. Nothing looks chaotic or alarming. Everything appears orderly, predictable, the perfect sign that this spot was calm and safe enough for rest. You picture a family settling nearby, their hammocks tied above this very ground, or their mats unfurled near the drier ridge behind you. Someone might listen one last time before lying down, ensuring no heavy splashes echoed from the deeper water. A parent might tilt their head, inhaling the air for unfamiliar scents. Someone else might study the moonlit mud, checking for signs of recent disturbance. Only when the swamp spoke clearly that all was well would they close their eyes. You rise slowly, letting the sounds wash over you again. The night has its own rhythm, a kind of slow pulse that spreads across the wetlands. When you learn to hear it, you begin to feel how sleep could come easily here. Danger does not disappear, but awareness transforms it into knowledge rather than fear. You feel the calm that comes from knowing you are not blind in the dark. You are listening, interpreting, understanding. As you step forward, the ground firms slightly beneath your feet. The scent of musk fades. The distant ripples quiet. You move toward the next place where sleepers shaped their nights with equal attentiveness. guided by the subtle wisdom of the swamp's hidden conversation. You walk toward a quieter stretch of the swamp, where the water deepens and grows still, reflecting the moon like a long silver blade. The air thickens here with a different kind of presence, not threatening exactly, but heavy with an alertness that settles into your skin. You slow your steps without thinking. The reeds thin, the mud firms, and the silence becomes sharper. This is the domain of the animals that commanded the greatest respect from anyone sleeping in these wetlands. The place where people learned not just how to rest, but how to rest wisely, and above all, how to remain safe in a landscape shared with powerful predators like alligators. You pause near a bank where the water laps gently at the soil. The ripple pattern looks normal at first, but then you notice an irregularity. A faint V-shaped disturbance glides across the surface. Not fast, not panicked, just steady, deliberate. You look more closely and see nothing at first. Then the movement stops. The surface smooths. The night hushes. It is only when your eyes adjust that you see the faint curve of a snout sitting motionless near the waterline, nearly indistinguishable from a floating log. You breathe out slowly. This is not a creature you dismiss lightly. A detail often recorded in early observations notes that communities living alongside alligators understood their habits intimately. They knew where these animals preferred to hunt, where they basked, where they nested, and which parts of the swamp offered natural protection from them. That knowledge became part of the nightly routine. Before settling down, people would check the banks for signs of fresh slides, the smooth channels in mud, indicating that an alligator moved across the edge recently. They also examined the water for certain ripples that suggested a lurking presence. You crouch now and run your fingers along the mud. Here the ground looks undisturbed, and that brings a subtle sense of ease. You shift your gaze to the edges of the channel. A fragment of dried watergrass lies bent in an unusual direction, a small but telling clue. A handful of traditional accounts describe how skilled travelers read minor plant movements to detect whether a large animal had brushed by during the night. Freshly bent grass meant recent activity, but grass bent and dried indicated movement from a previous day. Tonight, this patch looks old. The danger here is minimal. Another, lesser-known detail from regional stories reveals that some communities used raised platforms near deeper water for an unexpected reason. Not simply to avoid dampness, but to avoid startling nocturnal predators. Alligators moved silently at night. A person stepping on soft ground could unknowingly approach one. But by sleeping on elevated structures, families minimized nighttime wandering and reduced the chance of accidental encounters. Elevated sleep was not just comfort, it was strategy. You take a few steps along the bank, moving slowly. The moonlight paints a shifting shimmer across the surface, revealing the faint outlines of submerged roots and branches. You kneel again and listen. The swamp offers its usual song, but underneath it is an undertone of steady quiet. A calm stretch of water like this often meant that large animals had already passed through earlier in the night. People who lived here read the timing of these movements, choosing to sleep in zones that predators tended to leave behind during their routine patrols. You inhale deeply and smell a faint sweetness from flowering vines overhead. Beneath that scent is something richer and earthier, the smell of damp soil thickened by old leaves and waterlogged bark. You listen again. A soft splash breaks the stillness, not the heavy plunge of a large creature, more likely the delicate slip of a turtle or the gliding flick of a fish's tail, a comforting sign. Still, the presence of alligators shaped nightly decisions. Some elders reportedly taught children a simple rule: never sleep directly beside a channel where the water runs deep and silent. Shallow waters were safer, broad, open pools were safer, but narrow strips of dark, still water were potential pathways for animals that hunted by stealth. You step back now from the narrowest part of the bank and feel the instinctual caution that guided such choices. A conversation among researchers continues to this day regarding the exact strategies used to avoid nighttime encounters. Some propose that people relied primarily on elevated beds and smoke barriers. Others believe they used auditory cues, selecting places where acoustics revealed disruptions. A more recent interpretation suggests that groups tracked areas frequented by alligators using patterns learned over many generations. With the swamp always shifting, no single method can be proven with absolute certainty. The truth likely lies in a combination of techniques, each adapted to the unique terrain. You keep walking, the mud growing softer underfoot. Ahead, a small rise in the soil hints at a dry patch. You climb gently onto it and take in the surrounding landscape. The waterline sits several feet below, meaning that a sleeper here would rest safely above the paths frequented by alligators. You run your hand along the ground. It feels firm, cool, and fragrant with crushed vegetation. This type of spot would have been ideal for setting up a mat or a small shelter. Elevated enough to offer safety, yet close enough to the water for breeze and convenience. You kneel and close your eyes, listening to the gentle lap of water against the bank. The night hum deepens and the swamp begins to soften around you. You picture someone centuries ago kneeling in this same place, adjusting a reed mat or tightening a vine knot on a hammock. They would pause exactly as you are doing now, listening for signs of movement in the water. If all remained quiet, they would lie down for the night, trusting in their knowledge of the landscape. You let your imagination travel deeper. A family rests on a platform nearby. A child whispers questions about the large animals in the water. A parent explains quietly how the creatures keep mostly to certain routes, how the smoke from a slow-burning ember pot discourages them from approaching, how the light steps of small animals nearby signal safety, how the songs of frogs indicate undisturbed territory, and how, if everything sounds right, sleep can come without fear. You lower your body to the dry rise and feel the cool soil beneath your palms. The swamp seems distant now, softened by layers of instinct and understanding. You imagine lying here under the canopy, listening to the distant splash of an alligator hunting far away. You would hear it, acknowledge it, and relax again because you know that your resting place has been chosen with care. The presence of the predator is part of the night, not a threat at every moment. The breeze shifts suddenly, bringing the scent of cold water and the faint musk of distant creatures. You open your eyes. The water near the bank ripples once, then falls still again. Whatever moved beneath the surface keeps to its path. The swamp returns to calm. You rise and step off the ridge, moving deeper through the trees. You walk with quiet steps, with awareness in each breath. And as the night surrounds you, you understand that safety in these wetlands came not from avoiding danger entirely, but from learning its rhythms so completely that even sleep could exist alongside sharp-toothed neighbors. Ahead, the swamp widens again, and the soft glow of mist rising from the surface leads you toward the next layer of bedtime wisdom waiting to unfold in the darkness. You move away from the water's edge until the ground turns springy again, cushioned with layers of fallen leaves and moss. The swamp seems to widen here, the air softening as though the night itself wants to exhale. You sense a different rhythm forming around you, not the sharp attention needed near predators or the cautious listening for animal signs, but something warmer, more human. This is where families gathered at the end of long days, drawing close not only for safety but for comfort. Here, the shape of sleep changes. It becomes communal, synchronized with the rhythms of daily chores, seasonal cycles, and the deep hum of the swamp. You take a few slow steps and notice a cluster of soft depressions in the earth. They sit close together, aligned in a loose semicircle. It is easy to imagine woven mats or reed beds lying here, arranged so each person could feel the presence of another in the darkness. A detail that often appears in accounts describing wetland communities highlights how families preferred to sleep near one another. Not pressed tightly, but within arm's reach, allowing warmth to flow naturally and ensuring that the night's dangers were met with collective awareness. You kneel beside one of the shallow depressions and feel the soil. It holds a warmth that lingers even after centuries, as if it remembers bodies once lying there. A thin breeze brushes through the trees overhead. The branches sway gently, creating soft, rhythmic patterns of sound that feel like an echo of breathing. You sit down and let your hand sweep across the ground where those shapes lie. A tiny stone, smoothed by water, rests at the edge of one depression. Its placement seems intentional. Some families placed small keepsakes by their sleeping spots, not as decoration but as quiet markers to remind children where to lie when the night thickened. It could be a smooth pebble, a curved twig, or a feather tucked beneath a mat. You picture a sleepy child padding through the dark, guided by the feel of a familiar object. A less commonly mentioned detail emerges in your mind. Certain groups reportedly arranged nighttime sleeping spaces in patterns that mirrored their daytime social structure. Elders toward the back of the shelter, adults in the center, children at the warmest point near the fire or smoke mound. These arrangements created natural cocoons of warmth and security. Even without walls or doors, the structure of the group created a sense of enclosure. You shift your weight and lean back on your hands. The ground beneath you feels still and steady. The swamp hums around you in tones that seem more distant now, softened by the closeness of imagined sleepers. You can almost hear conversations drifting quietly through the dark. Parents discussing fishing routes for the morning, elders murmuring advice. Children hushed into rest with soft, shushing sounds. The night becomes a shared space rather than a solitary one. Your eyes drift across the clearing and settle on a spot where the ground rises slightly, forming a small natural bench. You walk toward it and crouch. The soil here is firmer. The leaves are crushed in a pattern that suggests repeated sitting. This is where someone might have kept watch for the first stretch of the night before joining the others. Families often rotated awareness naturally. No rigid system, just instinct and habit. Whoever felt most alert stayed awake a little longer. Whoever felt heavy with fatigue slept first. In this way, the group ensured that someone always listened to the swamp's shifting moods. The air thickens again with humidity, clinging lightly to your skin. You inhale deeply, letting the scent of wet vegetation settle into your lungs. If you close your eyes, you can imagine the subtle choreography of a family settling down. Someone stirs the embers of a small fire to create smoke. Another checks the mat edges. A parent smooths a child's hair before lying beside them. The night does not silence life. It slows it into a gentle rhythm. You lie back on the soft ground, staring up at the canopy. Through the branches, the sky glimmers with scattered stars, blurred by thin strands of mist rising from the swamp. The branches sway, their movement so regular it might lull anyone towards sleep. You imagine eyes slowly closing, breaths deepening, bodies shifting gently as the group settles into shared slumber. You roll onto your side, propping your head on your hand. As you do, a faint, distant splash reaches your ears, then fades. No one would wake for that sound. Too small, too normal. Families learned what sounds mattered. They woke when silence changed, when the swamp's breath hitched unexpectedly, or when the insects stopped singing. Those shifts were signals. But the usual chorus of frogs and cicadas, the irregular laps of water, the rustle of leaves, all of that became the lullaby of wetland nights. Discussions among anthropologists often diverge when trying to reconstruct these nighttime social patterns. Some researchers emphasize the deeply communal nature of sleep, proposing that shared slumber reinforced kinship bonds and emotional ties. Others propose a more fluid arrangement, shaped by the landscape, the weather, and the movement of food sources. With limited preserved material and knowledge relying heavily on oral memory, multiple interpretations continue to circulate. The diversity of wetlands across regions means there was no single pattern. Instead, each community adapted the night to its own rhythms. You trace a line in the soil with your finger, following the arc of one of the old depressions. The shape feels familiar, like the curve of a simple bed. You imagine lying there with your back nestled into the warm earth, surrounded by loved ones. Even in a place as unpredictable as a swamp, the presence of others created a sense of calm. Trusting the land was easier when you trusted the people beside you. You sit up slowly. The movement of the night around you grows more distinct. The hum of insects rises and falls like slow breathing. A bird calls once, then settles into silence. A faint slosh of water marks the journey of a small animal. Yet nothing feels threatening. The clearing feels like an island of calm, gently cupped by the swamp. You hover in the balance between wakefulness and the sense memory of sleep. You picture dawn rising over this space, families stirring quietly, stretching limbs that rested through the humid night, someone blowing gently on morning embers to coax breakfast fire, children rubbing their eyes while listening to the soft calls of birds welcoming daylight. The night did not isolate them. It strengthened their connection, helping them rise together and step into the day with shared purpose. You stand and brush your hands gently against your clothing, feeling grains of dried soil cling lightly to your palms. The ground beneath you seems to pulse faintly with warmth, as though holding echoes of countless nights spent here. You take one last lingering look at the sleeping shapes gently impressed into the earth, as if shadows of families remain even long after their footsteps vanished. You turn to continue onward. The communal warmth stays with you, a presence that wraps the swamp in a gentler glow, reminding you that the wetlands, despite their challenges, also nurtured bonds strong enough to calm even the wildest of nights. You step away from the area where families once slept in gentle clusters, moving toward a quieter pocket of the swamp where the air feels strangely lighter. As if carrying something unseen. A soft glow filters through the canopy, not from firelight but from the pale shimmer of fungus-covered bark and the faint glint of moisture on leaves. The night here has a different texture. You feel it almost immediately. It is more contemplative, more intimate, as though generations of whispered prayers and protective charms still linger beneath the trees. This is where you begin to sense the quieter world of shamanic night wards, the subtle spiritual tools people use to make darkness feel less lonely, less dangerous, and more like a space shared with unseen allies. You walk slowly, watching your footing as roots twist across the ground like sleeping animals. The air carries a faint scent of crushed herbs, something minty and sharp, mixed with the sweet aroma of dried flowers. You follow that scent until you reach a small clearing. Hanging from a low branch is a bundle of dried plants tied together with thin strips of bark. The bundle is no larger than your hand, but the way it sways in the breeze makes it feel almost alive. You step closer and notice the threads of spider silk caught between its leaves, glistening faintly in the moonlight. A detail frequently preserved in oral teachings across wetland regions describes how certain shamans or spiritual leaders prepared these herb bundles and positioned them strategically around sleeping areas. Some of the plants served as insect repellents, but their value went beyond the physical. They were believed to calm the night, steady the spirits, and invite peaceful dreams. You reach out and touch the dried stalks gently. They feel brittle, but their scent remains surprisingly potent. Even centuries later, the intention woven into the bundle seems to hum softly in the air. As you continue through the clearing, you notice another object near the base of a cypress tree. A small carving rests there. It looks simple at first glance, perhaps no more than a smoothed piece of wood. But when you pick it up, you see faint etchings along its sides, symbols or marks that seem to mimic the shapes of water currents. A number of traditional accounts describe such charms as protectors against restless spirits or ill luck, meant to absorb negativity or guide wandering energies away from sleepers. You hold it in your palm and feel its weight, surprisingly warm despite the night's coolness. A gentler, less commonly discussed detail surfaces from the stories passed down through community elders. Children sometimes slept with tiny carved tokens made of bone or resin, often shaped like animals associated with wisdom or protection. These tokens were more than comfort objects. They symbolized connections between the natural world and the dream world. A carved turtle might bring steadiness. A bird might bring clarity. A fish might guide dreams toward calm waters. You imagine a child curled on a mat, clutching a tiny figure, drifting to sleep while believing that unseen guides swam or flew beside them. You sit on a dry patch of ground and look around the clearing. Hanging herb bundles, carved figures, tiny markings on tree bark that catch the moonlight at strange angles. Nothing feels random here. Everything carries intention. Even the placement of stones seems purposeful. You pick one up and see a faint reddish stain near one edge, perhaps pigment once used in ritual painting. Some communities applied natural dyes to stones, posts, or their own skin before sleep, believing the patterns offered both physical and spiritual protection. You breathe deeply, letting the scents settle around you. The swamp's natural musk blends with herbal fragrances and the earthy smell of tree roots. It is calming, grounding, and strangely familiar. For a moment, you feel as though you are part of a quiet ceremony still ongoing beneath the surface of the night. A small movement near your feet catches your attention, a faint rustle. You look down and see nothing threatening, just a tiny creature disappearing into the underbrush. Still, your senses sharpen, not out of fear, but out of curiosity. People who lived in these wetlands believed that night creatures carried messages. The sound of a frog calling in a certain pattern might signal good fortune. The unusual cry of a night bird could call for extra vigilance. These interpretations varied widely, shaped by landscape, community memory, and the experiences of spiritual practitioners who listened closely to the swamp's nocturnal language. You tilt your head upward and watch the moon sift through the branches above you. The faint glow illuminates the herb bundles, making them sway like tiny lanterns. You imagine a shaman preparing these bundles at dusk, crushing leaves in their palms, murmuring soft songs to encourage tranquility. Songs not meant to summon anything dramatic, but to soothe the night into gentler rhythms. Sleep in the wetlands was not merely a physical necessity. It was woven into a relationship between people and the unseen forces that shaped their world. In scholarly circles, interpretations of these night wards vary considerably. Some experts believe these rituals were deeply symbolic, serving as expressions of identity and community cohesion. Others emphasize the practical benefits, noting that many plants used in protective bundles also repelled insects or created calming scents that eased breathing in humid air. Still others propose that the spiritual and practical aspects were inseparable, working together to create a nighttime environment that supported both physical safety and emotional well-being. Without written records, the full meaning of these practices remains open to understanding, leaving room for multiple perspectives that coexist like layers of the swamp itself. You shift your position and sit with your back against a tree. Your fingers trace small carvings in the bark. They form looping shapes, perhaps indicating flowing water or swirling wind. These marks may have once delineated a boundary, a subtle circle telling wandering energies that this space belonged to the living, the dreaming, the resting. You picture a shaman tracing these lines with a pigment-stained fingertip, whispering guidance into the wood, letting the tree become a silent guardian for anyone sleeping nearby. You lean your head back and close your eyes briefly. The scents, the sounds, the soft whisper of fronds moving overhead, all of it weaves into a calm that settles deeply into your chest. You imagine lying on a woven mat in this place, feeling the herb bundles sway above you, hearing the soft chorus of night creatures singing in the distance. The swamp feels less wild here, and more like an enormous breathing temple, a place where the boundary between the physical and the spiritual thins into a gentle shimmer. The longer you sit, the more you sense the quiet power of these night wards. They were not dramatic or flamboyant. They did not attempt to control the swamp or challenge its rhythms. They worked instead through harmony, acknowledgement, and subtle persuasion. They offered sleepers the feeling that the night was not an enemy, but a vast companion whose presence could be softened and tamed through shared language. You rise slowly, brushing bits of bark from your palms. The clearing seems brighter now, touched by the soft glow of moonlight filtering through the branches. You take one last look at the herb bundles, the carved figures, the symbols etched into the wood. These objects remain silent, but something about them lingers in the air like a hum just beyond hearing. You step forward, carrying that hum with you. The night deepens, but it no longer feels quite so dark. You walk with steady breath, guided by the quiet reassurance that people once found peace here, even in the most unpredictable corners of the swamp. You continue along the faint trail, noticing how the air shifts again. It grows sweeter, tinged with the fragrance of crushed leaves and ripe berries hidden somewhere in the darkness. The scent drifts across your path with a confidence that stands out from the muddier, earthier tones of the swamp. You pause and inhale more deeply. There is something bright about the aroma, something alive. It guides you toward a low cluster of bushes whose leaves gleam faintly in the moonlight. You step closer, and there, hanging in delicate clusters, are small swamp berries glowing like tiny lanterns against the darkness. They are different from the cultivated berries, you know. Their skins shimmer with a wild sheen, and their shapes vary from plump teardrops to round beads no bigger than your fingernail. You kneel beside the nearest bush and lift a berry gently between your fingertips. Its surface feels firm, cool, and slightly waxy. A detail preserved in several botanical surveys of wetland cultures points out that these berries were not valued primarily for eating, though some varieties were edible in moderation. Their real importance lay in the oils and juices they produced when crushed. Those oils, when mixed with certain leaves, created natural repellents that helped keep mosquitoes at bay through the long, humid nights. You look around and notice the faint splash of berry stains on nearby stones. Someone once sat here, grinding berries against the smooth surface with the flat side of a shell or a rounded rock. You touch the stone and feel its coolness. The surface slightly in the middle, worn down by years of use. You imagine a person sitting where you are, pressing berries into pulp, mixing their juices with fragrant leaves, and applying the mixture to their skin just before lying down to sleep. The scent would have masked human odor, discouraged insects, and softened the night air with a gentle sweetness. You pick one berry and roll it between your fingers. A faint juice stains your skin, releasing a sharp, citrus-like fragrance. A small detail from oral teachings explains that certain swamp berries became sticky when exposed to warm skin. This stickiness helped the natural oils cling longer, making them effective through several hours of the night. People learned to crush a handful of berries between their palms, rub them along their arms and legs, and then relax as the mixture slowly dried into a thin protective layer. You imagine carrying this scent through the darkness, a blend of fruit, leaves, and swamp water that signaled readiness for rest. A lesser-known insight from regional folklore suggests that some groups experimented with combining berry oils with clay or ash to enhance their staying power. The mixture formed a soft, pale paste that people applied to their skin. Paste cooled the body, repelled insects, and even camouflaged human scent from larger animals. It was an early form of protection crafted not in laboratories but in the quiet hours before sleep. You picture someone smearing the mixture across their arms with practiced hands, blending knowledge passed down through countless nights. You reach for another berry and crush it lightly. The scent rises again, brighter now. Around you the swamp reacts. A few insects veer away. A faint rustle moves through the reeds. You take a slow breath and let your senses settle. The mixture's fragrance blends with the swamp's natural perfume, damp moss, old leaves, and drifting fog. You feel how these scents merge into something comforting, something that makes the night feel less intrusive. You stand and walk a bit farther along the trail. The moonlight hits your berry-stained fingertips, turning them a dull copper. Ahead, You notice a small hollow in the trunk of an old cypress tree. You lean in and detect the faint scent of crushed plants inside. People sometimes stored leftover berry paste in tree hollows, safe from animals and shaded from heat. The paste would remain cool and usable the following night. The hollow now holds only remnants, but the scent is still there, ghost-like and subtle. You press your hand to the bark, tracing the shallow grooves left by someone's scraping mixture with a leaf or shell. The idea of these small, everyday rituals carries a quiet weight. Before sleep could settle in, there were preparations, each one connecting people to the environment. The swamp did not provide comfort automatically. Comfort was crafted through countless small acts like crushing berries, weaving fronds, or tending smoke fires. Each gesture created the conditions for peace. You step back again and listen to the night. The insects no longer swarm as loudly here. The berry scent seems to hold them at a respectful distance. You imagine lying down nearby, with the mixture cooling on your skin, feeling the air slip across your body in soft waves. The swamp would hum gently. The fireflies would drift like tiny sparks above your resting place. And the berry paste, faintly sticky at first, would slowly absorb into your skin, leaving behind only a whisper of fragrance. Researchers today offer different interpretations on how widely these berry repellents were used. Some propose that they were essential tools during peak mosquito seasons, applied nightly by every member of a community. Others argue that their use varied by region and plant availability, with some groups relying more on smoke or mud coatings instead. Without preserved samples, the full story remains open, allowing each theory to coexist like overlapping currents in the swamp. You lift another berry, crush it between your thumb and forefinger, and rub the juice lightly onto your wrist. The scent rises, cool and sharp. It feels refreshing against the humid air. You imagine how this simple mixture would ease the night's discomfort, turning sleep from a challenge into something soft and welcoming. You continue onward, leaving the berry bushes behind. The scent lingers on your skin, faint but resilient, guiding you deeper into the dark where the swamp whispers again. Ahead lies another piece of nocturnal wisdom, waiting among the shifting leaves and rising mist. You walk deeper into the wetlands until the trees thin just enough for the sky to widen overhead. The moon sits low, its light caught in the drifting mist that clings to the water. Here, the swamp feels more open, yet strangely more intimate. The humidity brushes against your cheeks like a warm hand, and the air carries quiet fullness, as though it is holding its breath. This is where nighttime decisions depended on a skill as subtle as any crafted tool, the art of reading the weather before sleep. Because in a place where storms rose with no warning and cold air could sweep over warm water in an instant, falling asleep without sensing the sky's mood was a gamble no one wished to take. You step onto a slightly raised mound, where the view of the sky becomes clearer. The horizon glows faintly, an uneven line where darkness meets silver. You tilt your head upward and notice that the stars tremble slightly, as if blurred behind a thin veil. A well-established observation in regional histories notes that wetland communities used small atmospheric cues like this to anticipate the night's comfort or discomfort. A halo around the moon often meant moisture building in the upper layers of the sky, a sign that rainfall could arrive before dawn. A clear, sharp moon suggested a dry night, ideal for sleeping in open shelters or hammocks. You study the sky more carefully. The clouds drift low, tinged with faint violet. Their undersides seem illuminated by something deeper than moonlight, a soft inner glow produced by trapped humidity. You crouch and let your fingers brush through the moist air, as if trying to feel the weight of the night itself. People who lived among these waters learned to sense weather changes through these tiny signs. The smell of the wind, the tilt of the clouds, the feel of the air pressing against their skin. A subtle insight found in the accounts of early travelers reveals that some families used the behavior of insects as another guide. When mosquitoes gathered in large visible clusters just before dusk, it often signaled stagnant air and a rise in humidity that could lead to rain. When insects remained dispersed, drifting through the swamp in loose patterns, The night was likely to stay clear. You listen now, noticing the hum around you. It feels steady, not frantic. The insects move normally, not rushing or clustering, and that gives you a sense of calm. You take a few steps forward and reach a fallen log. On its bark lies a thin scattering of dew. You touch it gently. The moisture is cool, which hints at a mild night ahead. If it had been warm, almost sticky to the touch, it might have suggested denser humidity and the possibility of storms. The swamp's clues are everywhere, waiting for someone to interpret them. A subtle insight found in the accounts of early travelers reveals that some families used the behavior of insects as another guide. When mosquitoes gathered in large visible clusters just before dusk, it often signaled stagnant air and a rise in humidity that could lead to rain. When insects remained dispersed, drifting through the swamp in loose patterns, the night was likely to stay clear. You listen now, noticing the hum around you. It feels steady, not frantic. A subtle insight found in the accounts of early travelers reveals that some families used the behavior of insects as another guide. When mosquitoes gathered in large visible clusters just before dusk, it often signaled stagnant air and a rise in humidity that could lead to rain. When insects remained dispersed, drifting through the swamp in loose patterns, the night was likely to stay clear. You listen now, noticing the hum around you. It feels steady, not frantic. You turn your attention to the breeze. It comes from the north, soft but steady, carrying the scent of cold water and wet minerals. The direction of wind mattered to sleepers here. If it came from the south, warm and fragrant with plant oils, it meant heavier humidity that made sleeping near water uncomfortable. A north wind, cooler and cleaner, meant safer sleep near open banks where air could circulate and keep insects at bay. You breathe deeply, letting the breeze flow across your face. Kneeling down, you brush your hand through the soil at your feet. It is moist but not waterlogged. In some traditional practices, people tested the ground's ability to hold warmth to predict how the night would unfold. If the earth stayed warm late into dusk, it meant humidity would cling through the night, making sleep inside enclosed shelters uncomfortable. If the soil cooled early, as it has now, it signaled a gentle night ahead. Another, more delicate piece of knowledge appears in stories passed down through generations. People watched the behavior of birds during the hour after sunset. If night birds called repeatedly in long, rising notes, it meant calm skies. If their calls were scattered, shortened, or absent, it often indicated shifting air pressure that would bring storms. You pause and listen. A bird calls in the distance, long and melodic. Its sound drifts across the water like a ribbon of reassurance. You move toward a cluster of cypress trees, drawn by the way their shadows stretch across the water. Near their roots, you notice a small pool reflecting the sky. You crouch down and watch how the reflection shifts. When clouds move quickly in the water's mirror, it can suggest rising winds. When the movement remains slow and steady, as it does now, it often signals a stable night. The pool holds the moon in its center like a pearl, barely disturbed by the tide. Researchers today continue to discuss the depth of knowledge required to make these nighttime predictions. Some suggest that people developed a refined, almost intuitive skill built from countless evenings watching the sky and listening to the swamp. Others propose that the knowledge was acquired more formally, taught by elders in small lessons before dusk. Without written documentation, it remains a topic of interpretation, but the consistency of these signs in oral histories reveals a sophisticated understanding of the landscape. You sit back on your heels, feeling the cool air settle around you. You imagine a family choosing their sleeping arrangement based on these cues. If the sky promised clear weather, they might sleep near the open water where breezes flowed freely. If clouds thickened or winds shifted oddly, they might opt for palm frond shelters or raised platforms to stay dry. The swamp may not have offered certainty, but it offered signs, and those signs shaped each night's comfort. You take another slow breath, The scent of distant rain is absent. The air feels even and balanced. If you were preparing to sleep here, you would likely choose a hammock between two sturdy trees, letting the night's coolness drift beneath you. Or perhaps you would lay out a reed mat on a small rise, trusting that the ground would remain dry until morning. A faint rustle passes through the trees, and a soft wave moves across the water, but nothing feels rushed or threatening. The swamp speaks gently tonight. You feel the weight of the air, the movement of clouds, the soft hum of insects, and the slow breathing of wind. Each piece tells a story. Together, they form the guidance that countless sleepers once relied on. You rise slowly, letting the sky settle into the edges of your vision. The moon climbs slightly, gaining brightness as clouds drift aside. The stars sharpen. You look once more at the pool reflecting the sky. Its surface remains smooth. You take a step forward, then another, letting the knowledge of the weather settle into your stride. Tonight, the swamp offers softness, a rare gift, and you carry that quiet reassurance with you as you move toward the next hidden art of nighttime life waiting just ahead. You follow the widening trail until the trees open onto a stretch of water, so calm it looks like a sheet of obsidian laid gently across the earth. A soft ripple glides through it as something moves just beneath the surface, then disappears. The air here feels different, carrying a coolness that drifts slowly across your cheeks. You pause, feeling the temperature drop slightly as you step closer to the water's edge. This is a part of the swamp where work and rest intertwined naturally, shaped by the gentle rhythm of night fishing. The hours when the world was quiet, fish drew near the shallows, and families balanced moments of drowsiness with brief intervals of soft, steady labor. You crouch at the edge of the water and let your hand hover above its surface. You feel the subtle heat rising from the stillness, a reminder that water retains the warmth of the day long after the air cools. Along the opposite bank, reeds sway like thin silhouettes, each one catching the moonlight in a different shade of silver. You listen closely and hear the distant plunk of a fish breaking the surface. Not frantic, not startled, just part of the effortless nighttime rhythm. A detail widely remembered in wetland communities describes how families used these quiet hours for specific types of fishing that required little noise and minimal effort. They would settle beside the water with simple tools, long sticks sharpened at the tips, small nets woven from plant fiber, or shallow baskets positioned near likely channels. While the adults kept watch, children often drifted into light sleep nearby, wrapped in blankets or resting on reed mats. The night became a blend of drowsy rest and occasional gentle action whenever the water stirred. You walk along the bank until you find a cluster of small posts driven into the mud in a neat line. They lean slightly, aged by water and time. You touch one and feel the texture of old wood softened by the swamp. These posts once held narrow baskets angled into the current. Fish traveling along the channel would slip inside, guided by the basket's shape. The family resting nearby needed only to check the baskets every so often, lifting them with slow, practiced movements. You imagine someone rising from a drowsy half-sleep to check a catch, then returning to lie down again, letting the swamp's hum lull them back toward rest. Near the water, you notice a flattened patch of grass where a mat might once have been. The ground still feels slightly firmer, as though shaped repeatedly by the weight of people sitting or reclining. You kneel there, and the soil's smoothness confirms it was used often. A small observation passed down through community elders suggests that certain families preferred to sleep near night fishing spots on calm evenings. The sound of water acted as a lullaby, and the steady rhythm of checking baskets or nets created a predictable cycle. Work and slumber blended into one fluid pattern. You imagine someone rising from a drowsy half-sleep to check a catch, then returning to lie down again, letting the swamp's hum lull them back toward rest. You crouch at the edge of the water and let your hand hover above its surface. You feel the subtle heat rising from the stillness, a reminder that water retains the warmth of the day long after the air cools. Along the opposite bank, reeds sway like thin silhouettes, each one catching the moonlight in a different shade of silver. You listen closely and hear the distant plunk of a fish breaking the surface. Not frantic, not startled, just part of the effortless nighttime rhythm. You sit on the flattened ground and let the coolness seep up through your clothing. Around you the water glitters with faint reflections of star-speckled sky. The swamp feels less mysterious here, more like a partner in the night's routine. You notice another small clue, a thin branch with its bark carefully scraped away in smooth patches. Someone likely used it to tap the surface lightly, sending small ripples into the water. A gentle trick. You lean back on your elbows and gaze upward. The sky arches above you, the stars faint but present, trembling through thin layers of mist. You picture a family reclining here between quiet fishing intervals. Someone hums a low melody. A child curls closer to a parent. The fishermen whisper so as not to disturb the water. The steady warmth of the soil beneath their bodies adds to the ease of falling asleep. Discussions among researchers exploring wetland traditions often highlight how adaptive nighttime routines were. Some propose that night fishing was a necessity during certain seasons when daytime heat was too oppressive. Others believe it was just as much a social event as a practical one. With limited historical tools remaining, the full picture is shaped by oral memory, ecological patterns, and traces like the very posts you see now. Each interpretation adds a layer to the understanding of how work and rest coexisted. You stretch your legs toward the water, letting the cool air brush against your feet. A small ripple forms near a submerged log. The sound is gentle and rhythmic, a natural cue that would have signaled someone to rise and check a net or basket. You watch the ripple fade and feel your body grow heavier with the night calm. You imagine the routine clearly now. A soft splash wakes you. You rise, half asleep, test the basket, remove a fish if it's caught, then return to your place on the mat. The entire process lasts a minute. The rest of the night belongs to sleep, punctuated by these small rituals that follow the water's whisper. You scoop a handful of cool earth and let it fall through your fingers. The grains slip away slowly, landing silently on the bank. Everything here moves in quiet, patient rhythms. It feels natural to settle into them. You stand and brush off your hands. The air grows cool still, hugging your skin with a faint chill. The water glimmers. The reeds whisper. You take one last look at the posts leaning along the bank. The soft reminder that night once carried purpose even as it cradled sleep. You turn and walk onward, following the soft pull of whatever the swamp will reveal next, your steps blending into the hushed music of darkness. You move onward, the night deepening around you like a warm, breathing cloak. The swamp shifts again beneath your feet, the ground firmer now, studded with roots and soft humps of vegetation. The air, thick with humidity, carries long strands of sound that seem to drift from every direction at once. Some are faint, like distant murmurs wrapped in fog. Others come sharp and sudden, cracking through the darkness before dissolving back into stillness. You pause, letting your senses adjust. This part of the wetlands teaches another essential skill used by countless sleepers who rested here: echo, listening, the art of forming a mental map of the unseen world around you using nothing but the bounce, drift, and decay of sound. You remain very still for a moment, letting the swamp speak. A soft splash comes from your left. The sound arrives crisp, but the echo that follows feels muted, absorbed quickly by the dense undergrowth. That tells you the water there is shallow, crowded with roots. A deeper echo would have indicated an open pool. You take a slow step in the opposite direction, already beginning to understand this silent language. A widely shared observation across wetland oral histories emphasizes how families learned to navigate darkness by sound alone. Children were taught early to identify specific types of echoes. The thick, slow echo of water hitting a hollow log meant a safe, open channel. The sharp strike of a twig snapping in a particular cadence, signaled animals moving through brush. And the soft, layered echo you hear now, drifting gently across your path, suggests a wide stand of trees nearby, their trunks spaced evenly like pillars in a shadowed hall. You walk forward, your senses sharpening as the echoes shift. A faint tapping echoes from somewhere above you. You glance up and spot the silhouettes of birds stirring on branches, their wings rustling softly. The echo falls quickly to the ground and fades. You crouch to feel the soil. It is compact and cool. This quick echo loss tells you the trees above are heavy with leaves, trapping sound before it travels far. Sleepers here would have understood that this kind of canopy provided protection from sudden rain and kept the night wind gentler. A place like this would have felt safe, cozy even, for someone lying on a mat or resting in a hammock. To your right, a long, low croak rises, then echoes in one clean wave across the water. That steady echo means an open channel lies nearby. The sound travels unhindered for several seconds before thinning. You stand, listening closely until the echo fades entirely. A subtle insight, found in the memories of elders who lived near tidal wetlands, reveals that slow-moving echoes meant the water level was stable. Sudden shifts, especially echoes that rose or fell too quickly, might indicate changes in current or the arrival of larger animals. Echoes acted as warnings, lullabies, and navigation tools all at once. You take a few more steps and stop again. This time, the swamp yields a different sound. A hollow knock echoes through the trees, bouncing unevenly from trunk to trunk. You tilt your head. When echoes shift like this, scattering unpredictably, it often means the terrain ahead is cluttered fallen trees, tangled roots, uneven ground. Sleepers would avoid resting there, knowing that the tangled earth attracted animals searching for shelter and created shadows where danger could hide. You inhale deeply, feeling the air swell in your chest. Somewhere behind you a branch snaps, but the echo is soft, absorbed instantly. That tells you the animal that made it is small, probably a possum or raccoon, moving through thick vegetation. Nothing to fear. You let the sound pass through you and fade. A less widely known detail found in certain regional teachings describes how people sometimes clapped softly or tapped two sticks together before choosing a place to sleep. The echoes revealed hidden hollows where water pooled or patches of wind-exposed ground that would be too cold without a shelter. You imagine someone tapping gently into the night, listening for subtle changes, then turning toward the spot where the echo fell just right. You walk toward a cluster of cypress roots rising from the earth like knotted sculptures. You tap your foot softly against one. The sound vibrates up your leg, then echoes with a low hum that hangs in the air for a moment before dissolving to the mist. This long echo suggests stable ground beneath the roots, strong enough to support weight. Perhaps a hammock once stretched between these very trees, its sleeper listening through the night with one ear tilted toward the swamp's quiet percussion. You move past the roots and step onto softer ground. The noise of your footfall sinks instantly, swallowed by damp earth. That tells you this patch would have been avoided. Too wet, too unpredictable. People sleeping here relied on the echoes of their own movement, just as much as the sounds around them. Even without seeing the mud, they could hear it. The swamp hums again. This time, the sound feels layered, as if three different echoes weave together at once, frogs calling from different ponds, wind gliding between trees, and small creatures rustling through brush. You stand still, letting the pattern settle into your mind. This is the soundscape of a safe night, predictable, balanced, familiar, a night where sleep comes easily. Discussions among sound researchers and ethnographers today often highlight the complexity of this echo-listening practice. Some believe it was a form of intuitive sonar developed naturally from constant exposure to wetlands. Others argued it was a deliberately taught skill, transmitted through generations like a quiet art form. The truth is likely somewhere in between, shaped by daily experience and guided by the wisdom of elders who read the swamp with extraordinary sensitivity. You close your eyes and let the echoes paint a picture around you, the tall trees forming a ring, the open water channel on your left, the dense, tangled brush behind, the cooling wind drifting through a gap in the branches overhead, all of it revealed through sound alone. You breathe slowly, deeply. The night feels textured, rich with subtle meaning, and as you begin walking again, each step becomes part of the map. You are learning to read a map created not from lines on paper, but from the living, breathing echoes of the wetland itself. You continue along the subtle rise of land until the trees thin into a gentle clearing where the swamp feels quieter, almost meditative. The air shifts again, carrying a faint aroma of smoke mixed with something faintly floral, like distant blossoms crushed underfoot. Here the earth feels firmer, dotted with shells and small stones that crunch softly beneath your feet. As you look around, a new layer of nighttime life reveals itself. This is where trade networks stitched together distant communities, and where sleep was shaped not only by the resources of the swamp itself, but by materials carried across waterways, exchanged with neighboring groups, and woven into bedding that transformed the comfort of long nights. You pause and kneel beside a cluster of shells scattered in an arc near a half-buried post. Their shapes vary: long spirals, smooth ovals, ridged fans. Some bear faint markings that look like scratches or tiny carved patterns. A well-documented detail in archaeological and ethnographic studies notes that many wetland cultures participated in extensive trade routes reaching far beyond their immediate regions. These routes carried shells from coastal areas, fibers from forested uplands, pigments from river valleys, and specialized tools shaped hundreds of miles away. Even at night, even in these humid wetlands, sleepers sometimes rested on mats, cushions, or blankets enhanced with materials that came from far beyond the swamp's boundaries. You pick up a smooth, oblong shell. Its surface feels cool and delicate, holding the faint memory of distant waters. Some communities used shells like this as tools for scraping plant fibers. Others crushed them into powder to temper clay for pots that later held warm embers or herbal mixtures placed near sleeping mats. You trace the shell's edge and imagine a traveler canoeing through these very waters, carrying these items wrapped carefully in woven baskets to trade with families who live deeper in the wetlands. You rise and continue forward until you reach the remains of a woven bundle lying beneath a fallen branch. The fibers look weathered, but the pattern remains faintly visible. The weave is tighter and more intricate than the reed mats you saw earlier. The strands look thinner, smoother, almost silky. A less commonly mentioned insight from regional histories suggests that certain plant fibers used for bedding did not grow in the deeper parts of the swamp. Instead, they were gathered from upland forests or riverbanks and brought into wetland communities through exchange. These fibers created softer mats, stronger ropes for hammocks, and finer netting for insect screens. You sit beside the bundle and touch the strands gently. They feel surprisingly sturdy even after years exposed to humidity. You imagine a trader, arriving at dusk, stepping from a canoe as a family begins pairing their nighttime space. The trader unwraps bundles of fine fibers, maybe dyed in soft reds or muted greens, and offers them in exchange for smoked fish, medicinal plants, or carved tools. Sleep that night would be different. Softer mats, smoother pillow supports, perhaps even a more flexible hammock strung between trees. You shift your position and look toward a small pile of stones arranged near a stump. They seem out of place, angular and darker than the sandy soil. You pick one up and feel its heavier weight. It is volcanic stone, likely from a region far from wetlands. A modest but intriguing detail appears in certain archaeological findings. Volcanic stones were sometimes traded for use as weights in weaving or for shaping fibers. Their presence here suggests that distant trade links reached into the swamp, and that items valued far away contributed quietly to the comfort of nighttime rest. As you turn the stone in your hand, you feel its smooth edges. It would have been perfect for flattening bark fibers or compressing bundles of reeds before weaving. You can almost see someone pressing fibers beneath it by firelight, preparing bedding that would cradle a family through humid nights. You rise again, stepping over the stump, and follow the trail deeper into the clearing. The moonlight brightens the space, revealing a long piece of woven cloth half buried in leaves. Its weave is loose, airy, and patterned with tiny holes. The edges are frayed, but the structure remains intact enough to recognize. Some traditions describe cloth like this as early mosquito screens or draped coverings placed near sleeping spots to help shape airflow. Such cloth did not originate in the swamp. It came from exchange networks extending along rivers, carried by traders who understood that comfort during sleep could be as valuable as knives or baskets. You lift the cloth gently. It crumbles slightly but still holds together in patches. When you hold it up, the moonlight filters through the holes, creating a shimmering pattern on the ground. You imagine how it would have looked stretched between two poles over a sleeping space, catching firelight and fluttering softly as night breezes pass through. A child might have slept beneath it, comforted by the slow motion of shadows dancing above them. A debate often noted among researchers concerns how structured these trade networks were. Some theories suggest that communities maintained regular exchange routes, traveling predictable paths each season. Others argue for a more informal system of intermittent exchange based on need, chance encounters, or seasonal gatherings. Without written records, the precise nature of these networks remains open to interpretation. Yet the physical evidence, shells, stones, fibers, cloth points, unmistakably to long-distance interaction. You follow a series of faint footprints pressed into the ground, their edges softened by dew. They lead to a low platform of woven branches. On top lies a small, hardened ball of reddish clay. You pick it up and roll it in your palm. The clay is fine-grained, unlike the thick mud found throughout the swamp. It was shaped somewhere else, far from these wetlands. Perhaps it once held fragrant resins or powdered leaves, used to scent bedding or repel insects. You hold it to your nose and smell the faintest trace of something floral mixed with smoke. You lower yourself onto the edge of the platform. The wood beneath you creaks softly. You imagine this platform once held sleeping mats woven from both local reeds and traded fibers. Comfort in the swamp was never a single invention. It was a combination of local knowledge and distant gifts. A hammock might be hung with imported cordage. A mat might be decorated with shells from distant shores. A small pouch of coastal herbs might hang over a child to soothe their dreams. The breeze shifts and carries with it a faint echo of voices, not real voices, but the kind you imagine when sitting in a place where many people once passed through. You think about a traveler arriving by canoe under a starlit sky. The traveler shares stories from distant regions. Children gather around, eyes wide. Adults exchange goods, laughter, and quiet nods. Then, when the night grows deep, everyone prepares their bedding using materials from faraway sources blended with those gathered that very evening. You run your hand along the platform and feel the soft give of old fibers beneath your fingertips. It feels like a fragment of the past resting gently under your palm. You breathe in, letting the air fill your lungs, rich with the scent of the swamp, the memory of trade, and the soft whisper of distant landscapes woven into the night. You stand slowly, returning the clay bead to its place, and step forward once more. The ground grows softer as you walk, and the swamp's hum rises again. Ahead, the night promises another glimpse into how people rested in harmony with the land, not just with its dangers, but with its gifts and connections that stretched far beyond the marsh's dark edges. You walk on, guided now by a hush that feels warmer than the rest of the swamp. The air here carries a softness, as though something tender and human once gathered beneath these trees. The mist drifts lower, hugging the earth in pale ribbons. You sense the faint echo of voices long faded, not sharp like warnings or practical instructions, but gentle and close to the ground. You follow the sound in your imagination, and soon you arrive at a small clearing sheltered by bending branches. This is where families once settled into the most intimate part of the night. The quiet exchange of stories murmured in the dark, the tales that soothed young minds and settled anxious hearts. Midnight story murmurs that shape dreams as much as sleep itself. You kneel among the soft leaves and small bits of fallen bark. The ground feels cushioned, almost inviting. You imagine children nestled on reed mats or moss hammocks, their bodies warm from the day's heat but slowly cooling as night deepens. Close beside them lie adults, speaking in low tones meant only for nearby ears. A detail frequently mentioned in oral traditions describes how bedtime stories were chosen for their calming rhythms rather than their content. The stories were not always dramatic. Many were gentle accounts of animals wandering through the swamp, of rivers learning to flow, or of stars watching over sleeping families. You pick up a piece of thin bark lying beneath a cypress root. Its inner surface holds faint etchings, not recognizable shapes but small marks made by hands that once tapped or traced as someone told a tale. Some accounts reveal that storytellers kept tactile objects nearby to hold or manipulate as they spoke, guiding the rhythm of the tale. Perhaps this bark once served that purpose, its smooth surface warmed by touch as words drifted through the darkness. You sit cross-legged and imagine the murmur of a parent's voice. The sound would rise gently, flow for a moment, then soften into a whisper. A frog calls nearby, its low croak echoing through the clearing. That call would have folded effortlessly into the story, becoming part of the rhythm. Some traditions describe how storytellers incorporated real swamp sounds into bedtime tales, weaving the night itself into the narrative so children would feel familiarity rather than fear. You look upward, through branches that form a sheltered dome. Moonlight filters through the leaves, scattered into faint, trembling spots. That soft light would have illuminated the edges of faces, hands, and woven mats, giving the stories a glow that encouraged drowsiness. You close your eyes briefly and imagine the sensation of lying on your back here, hearing quiet breaths around you, drifting deeper into sleep with the sound of your family's voices fading slowly into the rhythm of the swamp. You shift slightly and pick up another object, a tiny feather caught on a reed. Its softness reminds you of something noted in several community memories. Some sleepers carried small items like feathers or smooth stones to stroke silently as they listened to stories. The repeated motion calmed the body and kept restless hands busy, helping children unwind. You glide the feather along your fingers and feel its lightness, its soothing texture. Even without a story, the gesture alone feels peaceful. You rise and walk to the center of the clearing. The ground dips slightly, forming a gentle basin. This depression likely held a small fire once, not the kind used for cooking or warmth, but a softer flame meant only to glow. Certain groups used nighttime ember bowls here, placing smoldering herbs or bark inside them to create a scent that drifted peacefully through the camp. The aroma of calming plants like sweetgrass might have filled this clearing, blending with stories and breath to create a cocoon of comfort. A lesser-known detail preserved in a few regional teachings reveals that storytellers often varied their tales by season. In the wet months, stories focused on calming water spirits or wandering creatures seeking shelter. In the dry season, tales shifted to themes of patience, waiting, and the rhythms of slow growth. The stories reflected the swamp's moods, helping listeners feel in harmony with their environment. You sense how such tales smoothed the anxieties of night. When thunder rumbled across distant waters, children might hear a story about the sky washing itself clean. When insects buzzed loudly, the tale might explain their music as part of a grand nighttime chorus. You step closer to a fallen log, its surface soft with moss. You lower yourself onto it and feel the cushion beneath you. Here, You picture an elder sitting during the deep hours of night, voice low, eyes half closed, guiding listeners into dreams. Their words would not have been rushed. Each sentence paused long enough to let the night fill the space. The elder's voice softened with age, blending into the swamp's own breath. Sleepers nearby might drift in and out of awareness, letting the story carry them gently until their dreams took over. Modern scholars offer different views about these nighttime storytelling rituals. Some argue that the stories served mainly as educational tools, teaching children about survival, weather, animals, and social norms. Others believe the tales were soothing mechanisms designed to ease the nervousness that crept into nights full of unknown sounds. A more recent interpretation suggests that storytelling formed a bridge between the physical and emotional aspects of nightlife, shaping not just knowledge but also comfort. Without written accounts, the meaning of these stories remains open to interpretation, but their presence in oral memory highlights how central they were to the rhythms of sleep. You tilt your head and listen to the swamp now. The frogs hum, insects buzz, water shifts softly in a distant channel. Combined, these sounds form a natural backdrop for stories. You can almost hear whispered voices blending into this tapestry of noise. A gentle murmur here, a soft laugh there, the rising cadence of a tale describing how fireflies learn to glow. Your chest loosens as you imagine the warmth such stories brought to long, humid nights. You walk toward the edge of the clearing and place your palm on a tree trunk. Its bark is textured with grooves that seem shaped by years of touch. Perhaps listeners leaned here as stories unfolded. Perhaps small hands slid along these grooves as children settled next to their elders. You sense the life that once filled this space. Not loud, not chaotic, quiet, intimate, beautiful. You step away and take one last look at the clearing, glowing faintly under the moon. It feels like a cradle of memory, a place where stories settled into the ground as gently as dew. You feel the remnants of that comfort wrap around you as you move on, deeper into the night, carrying the warmth of whispered tales into the shifting shadows ahead. You leave the warmth of the storytelling clearing behind, and soon the swamp begins to widen again, stretching out in long sheets of water that glimmer beneath the moon. The air grows cooler, tinged with the faint scent of moving currents. You notice immediately how different this part of the wetlands feels. The ground is softer in places, firmer in others. The plants shift in height and color. The hum of insects changes pitch. All of it hints at something subtle yet deeply important, the seasonal migration patterns that shaped where families slept from month to month. Nights here were never static. They moved. They breathed. They wandered in tune with the swamp cycles. You walk along a narrow embankment and feel the soil changing under your steps. In some places it sinks quickly, soaked by fresh floodwater. In others it rises in a dry ridge shaped by receding currents. A long-remembered observation in many wetland traditions explains that groups often shifted their sleeping spots depending on insect density, water level, and the growth of protective vegetation. During peak mosquito seasons, families moved toward breezier ridges or open water where insects thinned. When cooler months arrived and breezes turned sharp, they retreated deeper into sheltered pockets beneath the trees. You pause to study the landscape. Ahead, the water darkens into a deeper pool. Beside it, a dry patch glistens faintly with salt crystals left from recent evaporation. You crouch and touch the crystals. They catch under your fingernail, tiny and sharp. This patch would be safe for resting for only a short time. After the next rise in water, it would vanish again. You imagine families walking through at dusk, reading the signs as easily as you now read footprints in soft soil. The swamp was a shifting mosaic, and selecting where to sleep meant responding to its movements with quiet attentiveness. The swamp was a shifting mosaic, and selecting where to sleep meant responding to its movements with quiet attentiveness. During these months, wetland families avoided sleeping near thick reed beds, and moved instead toward windswept channels or elevated platforms above the water. You shift your position slightly, and the breeze changes. Cool air flows toward you from the east, carrying with it a wave of relief. You step into it and feel how the insects disperse. Breezes acted as guides. A strong night wind could determine whether a family slept in the open, suspended between trees, or retreated into a palm frond shelter. You lift your face and breathe in the night air. The wind's movement tells you this area would have been perfect for sleeping during late summer, when insects swarmed most heavily. A lesser-known detail whispered in regional stories suggests that some families followed the migratory habits of birds to choose their seasons of movement. When certain waterbirds gathered in large groups near open water, it indicated the arrival of drier conditions. That meant fewer mosquitoes, more breathable nights, and better opportunities to sleep in canoe-side platforms or hammocks. When birds vanished deeper into forested wetlands, the humidity was rising again, hinting at nights where smoke rings and enclosed shelters became essential. You look up now and see a small flock drifting across the sky, their silhouettes cutting slowly across the moonlit clouds. Their direction is westward, gliding toward deeper vegetation. The sight carries a silent meaning, one that families in the past would have recognized immediately. The insects are heavier tonight near the interior. You nod inwardly at this subtle wisdom. You step deeper into the landscape, following a line of dry ridges. Between them lie narrow troughs, still filled with water from recent rains. The air shifts noticeably in these pockets. One area smells fresh and clean. Another carries the sour smell of stagnant water. The stagnant scent carries a heavy weight. This is where insects breed most quickly, and where nighttime sleep would be most miserable. People once avoided these troughs instinctively. Even in darkness, the smell alone guided them away. A question that modern researchers often discuss concerns how far families typically moved during these seasonal shifts. Some propose short migrations of only a few hundred meters, enough to stay ahead of insects or rising water. Others argue for longer movements tied to fishing cycles, plant harvesting seasons, or social gatherings across broader territories. Without written records, the answers remain flexible, shaped by environmental evidence, stories, and archaeology. But what becomes clear is that sleeping patterns were fluid. Nights were not fixed rituals. They changed, adapted, and flowed with the swamp's own pulse. You climb onto a small knoll that rises several feet above the surrounding water. The ground here is surprisingly dry, holding only faint traces of moisture. This could have served as a seasonal sleeping ground, high enough to avoid minor flooding, still close to fish channels and plant resources. You kneel and brush your fingers across the soil. Tiny rootlets cling just below the surface. Their dryness tells you the water level has not risen here recently. A safe place. Comfortable. Breezy. You imagine a family setting up their beds here, perhaps during late spring when water dropped enough to expose these high mounds. The children would spread reed mats. Adults would tie hammocks or arrange palm frond shelters. Insect repellents would be prepared from berries and herbs. Nights might feel lighter, the humidity manageable, the air cool enough to soothe tired muscles. Then you picture the same family months later, after heavy rains. The mound would be underwater, the reeds thicker, the air heavier. They would move again, perhaps toward elevated platforms or hidden hollows where breezes threaded through branches. The swamp was never the same place twice, and sleepers flowed with its changes like water adjusting to a new channel. You rise and take a slow breath. The air tonight sits between seasons, cool enough to carry breeze, humid enough to cling to your skin. The insects swirl in manageable clouds. If you had to choose a sleeping spot now, you would look for a gentle ridge, a place touched by wind, elevated enough to stay dry until morning. You begin walking again, letting your feet follow the faint rise of land. Each step reveals how deeply the swamp's seasonal moods influenced rest. The night hums around you, a reminder that sleep here was never simple. It was a negotiation, a partnership, a dance with shifting water, rising temperatures and wandering wildlife. And as you move forward into the next stretch of darkness, you sense that another layer of nighttime strategy is waiting just ahead, shaped by fire, warmth, and the careful placement of light. You walk onward until the path narrows and the swamp folds in around you like two great curtains of shadow. The air thickens again with humidity, but now you also smell something faint and familiar drifting on the breeze. A hint of embers, a wisp of charred wood. The scent is thin, stretched by distance, but unmistakable. You follow it, letting the aroma guide you the way sleepers once did, and soon you see the faint glow of dying firelight flickering across a patch of open ground. This is where you learn another quiet art of nighttime survival, the careful placement of fire, a practice that turned chaos into calm and made sleep possible even in the heart of a mosquito-filled, predator-rich wetland. You step into the clearing and pause to take it in. The ground here is packed with soft ash, scattered like pale dust across the soil. A small fire pit sits in the center, cold now but ringed with charcoal. Nearby, 3 smaller circles of cracked stone suggest where secondary fires once smoldered. You crouch beside the main pit and examine the shape of the stones. They form a subtle pattern, not a perfect ring but an open crescent. A detail frequently referenced in traditional accounts explains that many wetland families arranged their fire structures so heat and smoke flowed outward in specific directions. Fires were never placed simply to illuminate. They were positioned to guide insects away, protect sleepers from curious animals, and create soft airflow patterns that diffused humidity. You straighten up and examine the layout more closely. The smaller pits are positioned at the clearing's edge, their angles carefully measured. If a breeze passed through, smoke from these outer fires would join with the main pit smoke, forming a gentle barrier. Not thick enough to choke, not hot enough to disturb rest, just a thin, continuous veil that signaled to insects and animals, in the language of nature, not to cross. You walk between the fire pits, studying their alignment. One points toward the densest part of the swamp, where mosquitoes likely gathered in thick clouds during the warmest months. Another faces a narrow channel where animals sometimes traveled at night. The third points toward lower ground, directing smoke into the area where cool air pooled and insects lingered near dawn. You imagine a family sitting here before sleep, tending each fire briefly, adjusting the wood, placing damp leaves at just the right moment to create long, steady trails of smoke. A lesser-known detail found in certain oral histories describes how some groups experimented with combining different types of wood, fast-burning, slow-burning, and aromatic, so that each fire played a distinct role. One created warmth to dry mats or blankets. Another produced thick, fragrant smoke to repel biting insects. The third maintained a constant glow to help the night watcher see without straining their eyes. Taken together, these fires created a balanced environment where sleep felt safe, even in the wildest parts of the wetland. You kneel beside one of the smaller pits and sift the ash between your fingers. It is fine, powdery, and surprisingly cool. You can almost sense the hands that once tended it, adding twigs and bark with practiced precision. Fire maintenance was not a casual act. It required deep understanding of airflow, plant properties, and the swamp's shifting personality. Even the height of the flame mattered. Too tall, and predators might be drawn by curiosity. Too low, and insects returned in thick waves. A calm, steady ember glow was ideal, flickering softly like a pulse in the night. You sit back and imagine the clearing filled with the soft movements of a family preparing for rest. Someone arranges mats near the warm side of the main fire. Someone else smooths earth over hot spots to prevent sparks. A child gathers dry leaves to place in a pouch for tomorrow's fires. An elder gives a final nod of approval before stepping back to let the night settle. The fires begin their slow duet of smoke and warmth, guiding the night into a gentler form. You rise and walk to the far side of the clearing. From here, you can see how the fires illuminate the surroundings. The light spreads in warm patches, leaving certain parts intentionally dark. A quiet technique mentioned in a handful of regional accounts suggests that people often left the ground behind their sleeping spots dim or unlit. Bright light attracted attention. Shadows, when placed strategically, offered protection. The fires faced outward toward the swamp, not inward toward the sleepers. That way, any creature drawn by curiosity would be highlighted before reaching the resting family. A small pile of wood sits near a cypress trunk. You pick up one piece. The bark is thin and peels easily under your thumb. It still smells faintly resinous. These were likely aromatic logs used to create pleasantly scented smoke. People once believed such smoke cleared the mind and tightened the boundary between dreaming and waking. You rub the bark between your fingers and breathe in. The scent is subtle but grounding. You walk back to the center fire pit and picture how its placement also shaped airflow inside a shelter. If a palm frond canopy stood here, the fire would warm the ground lightly without overheating the sleepers. If hammocks hung nearby, the smoke would drift just below them, forming a protective layer between the sleepers and the insects hovering near the ground. It was a delicate balance, maintained through years of observation. Modern scholars often explore the complexity of this fire placement practice. Some suggest that families relied on instinctive understanding born from lifelong immersion in the swamp. Others argue that fire management was taught intentionally, with children learning to read air currents, wood types, and the night's shifting patterns. Without written documentation, the depth of this knowledge remains open to interpretation. Yet the precision of these fire circles hints at a system far more sophisticated than mere trial and error. You lower yourself into a squat and rest your palm on the warm soil where the main fire once burned. You imagine lying here, the smoke flowing gently around you, the warmth easing the dampness from your skin. The fire's glow flickering across tree trunks would create a slow, rhythmic pulse of light, softening the night's darker edges. You close your eyes and picture the moment just before sleep, a rustle in the reeds, a faint splash in the distance, but the fires remain steady, their smoke drifting outward in peaceful waves. You feel the safety they once provided, the sense of enclosure they created without walls. You understand that these fires were more than tools. They were guardians. When you rise again, the clearing feels different, warmer, more intimate. The echo of many nights lingers here, woven into the ashes and the charred stone. You take a slow breath and step toward the path leading onward, carrying with you the calm assurance that even in the wildest hours of the swamp, people shaped the night into a place where dreams could settle gently. You continue along the dim path until the smell of smoke fades behind you, replaced by something richer, warmer, and almost comforting. It takes you a moment to recognize it, but then your stomach gives the answer before your mind does. The air carries the scent of broth, of cooked roots, of slow-heated herbs. You smile inwardly. This is the part of the night when the day eases into restfulness, when families prepared small evening meals that soothed the body and guided it gently towards sleep. Food before sleep was not indulgence here. It was ritual, balance, a way of preparing the mind and muscles for hours of humid darkness. You step onto a soft rise in the ground and find the faint outline of a hearth pit. It is shallow, lined with smooth river stones darkened by long-burned fire. A thin scattering of charred fragments lies near the edge. You kneel and pick one up. It crumbles easily between your fingers. A commonly noted detail across wetland histories describes how families cooked simple nighttime soups from tubers, fish scraps, and leafy plants. These meals were easy on the stomach, warmed the body from within, and used ingredients that settled gently instead of weighing the sleeper down. You imagine someone stirring a clay pot here, the scent rising slowly through the swamp air. You sit beside the hearth and picture the scene as it once unfolded, children leaning close, waiting for their bowls, adults exchanging quiet words about the day's tasks. the steam rising in soft spirals, carrying hints of herbs that cleared congestion in humid weather. People ate slowly at night, not hurried like during daytime chores. Food softened everything. Worries, muscles, even the buzzing of mosquitoes seemed less irritating when warmth filled the chest. As you place the crumbled fragment back into the soil, something catches your eye. Near the base of a nearby tree lies a small woven pouch. You lift it gently. Though the fibers are weak with age, a faint smell of mint and crushed bark lingers inside. A less widely discussed insight from some regional teachings mentions that certain plants were used specifically for nighttime digestion. These herbs settled the stomach, cooled the body, and eased breathing. Families sometimes chewed them after supper or mixed them into broths served just before lying down. You walk deeper into the swamp until the trees tighten around you again, their branches arching overhead like clasped fingers. The air cools slightly, carrying a thin mist that settles across your face in a soft veil. Here the night grows quieter, almost expectant, as though it is waiting for someone to open their eyes at dawn and speak the first sleepy words of the morning. A small cup-shaped indentation in the soil near the stones draws your attention. When you touch its edges, you find them smooth, as if shaped by repeated handling. Perhaps it once held a bowl carved from gourd or wood, passed from hand to hand. A quiet but intriguing detail mentioned in a few old narratives suggests that certain families made small, mildly sweet drinks from fermented berries or tree sap to sip before dream time. Not enough to intoxicate, but enough to lull the mind into calmness. The drink likely tasted sour and earthy, but the effect of soft relaxation settling behind the eyes must have been welcome. You shift your weight and listen to the swamp. The hum of insects continues in a steady rhythm, but something about it feels gentler now. Perhaps it is because you can imagine how the night once blended with the smell of warm food, creating a pocket of tranquility even in the middle of wilderness. You walk a little farther until you reach a thin ridge overlooking shallow water. Here, you spot a stone slab engraved with faint grooves. You run your fingers along them. These grooves were likely made by grinding seeds or nuts. A detail recognized in several early studies notes that finely ground seeds mixed with water produced a thick paste used to coat the throats of people who struggled with nighttime coughing, a common issue in humid weather. Such remedies soothed sleepers and reduced disturbances that could awaken the entire family. Such remedies soothed sleepers and reduced disturbances that could awaken the entire family. You sit on the slab and rest your hands on your knees. You imagine the final minutes before sleep as they once unfolded. Someone ladles broth into small bowls. Someone else mashes herbs into a paste for children. A parent crushes a few seeds to calm a restless stomach. The meals were never large, just enough to warm the belly, steady the breath, and ease the transition into dreams. The swamp's heaviness felt less daunting with warmth in the chest. But the physical traces, hearth pits, grinding stones, herb remnants suggest that food played a gentle, central role in shaping nighttime peace. A discussion that often arises among scholars concerns the role of these nightly meals. Some interpret them as practical responses to humidity and insects, emphasizing digestion and comfort. Others view them as emotional rituals, anchoring families in a shared moment before sleep. Still, others believe they held spiritual significance, marking the boundary between day's energy and night's silence. Without written evidence, the full meaning remains fluid. You stand slowly, letting the image fade into the hum of the swamp. The warmth from those imagined bowls seems to cling faintly to the air, like a memory made of steam. You take a final breath in the clearing, feeling its calmness settle into your chest. Then you step forward, guided by the promise of another layer of nighttime wisdom, waiting just beyond the next bend in the dark. You lift your gaze to the moonlit water. The reflections shimmer like shifting threads. You picture someone sipping warm broth, eyes half closed, listening to the frogs and insects blend into a soothing tapestry. The warmth moves slowly through their limbs, loosening the tension of the day. Their breath deepens. Someone nearby hums a quiet tune. A child leans against a parent's side. The night wraps around them, softened by the lingering comfort of the meal. You rise and follow the faint path beyond the tree. The ground levels into a flat space that once held several cooking stones arranged in a crescent shape. You imagine a family here preparing a thick root mash after a long day. The blend of yam-like tubers, heated slowly until soft, acted as an energy anchor during humid nights. Too much heat could overwhelm the body, but the gentle warmth of cooked roots gave just enough comfort to promote rest. You walk on until the faint warmth of imagined soup fades from the air, replaced by a different kind of quiet, a stillness so complete it feels as though the swamp itself is holding its breath. Your steps soften instinctively. Even the insects seem to hum more gently here, their rhythm lower, steadier. You follow a narrow trail lined with pale roots that twist like sleeping serpents. The ground beneath you grows firmer, a hint that this area lay just above the highest flood line. You pause at a small rise overlooking a shallow stretch of water. Here, the moonlight reflects in faint ripples, and the air carries a mild chill. You can almost sense the presence of someone who once stood guard at this very spot, listening for disturbances in the delicate tapestry of night sounds. You crouch near the water's edge and examine a fallen branch. Its bark is smoothed on one side, not by wind or rain, but by repeated handling. Perhaps someone leaned here during their watch, resting their weight just enough to stay grounded while listening to the rhythm of the swamp. You run your fingers along the smooth patch and imagine the feel of humid air brushing a watcher's skin, the whisper of insects drifting softly across their ears. A lesser-known piece of wisdom passed down among some wetland communities suggests that the night patrol did not always rely on eyesight. Instead, watchers focused on sound, scent, and the subtle movement of wind. They learned to recognize the usual chorus of frogs, the normal rustling of brush, and the rhythmic splash of fish in the distance. When something shifted, a sudden silence, an unexpected crack, a ripple traveling the wrong direction, the watcher stirred fully. But most nights, nothing threatened the camp. The world breathed normally, and the watchers simply listened, allowing their half-wakefulness to guide them. You step farther into the clearing and find a cluster of stones arranged in a loose semicircle. This may have been a resting place for the watcher. The stones are placed at angles that suggest someone could sit, lean back slightly, and still maintain a view of the surrounding terrain. You lower yourself onto one and tilt your head the way a watcher might have, listening for sounds that drift between the trees. The swamp's voice tonight feels calm, evenly layered, like a soft blanket of noise. Nothing abrupt, nothing out of place. You close your eyes briefly. The soundscape sharpens in your inner hearing. A frog calls from the north, its voice long and low. A cluster of insects vibrates near a tree on your right, steady and faint. Water laps gently against a log. All of it blends into a predictable pattern. You imagine a watcher hearing these same tones and allowing themselves to relax, knowing the camp behind them slept safely. Another subtle detail found in scattered accounts hints that watchers sometimes carried small tokens, not weapons, but objects meant to keep them centered. A carved charm, a smooth stone, or a piece of cloth tied around the wrist. These items reminded them of their purpose, to maintain calm rather than chase danger. The goal was not confrontation. It was presence, quiet presence that steadied the night. You rise and walk toward the darker edge of the clearing where dense vegetation thickens. You push aside a curtain of low branches and find a shallow depression in the ground. Inside lies a faint scattering of crushed leaves. You scoop some into your hand. Their dryness suggests careful arrangement. Some families prepared small nests of quiet leaf mats for watchers to sit on, soft enough to prevent fatigue, silent enough that no sound caught beneath them. You drop the leaves gently and feel the memory of their softness linger on your palm. You continue deeper into the clearing, noting how the terrain rises and falls in subtle curves. You can imagine a watcher walking these lines, choosing the highest spots for listening and the lowest spots for checking scent or airflow. A quiet step here, a careful pause there. The patrol was never hurried. It was more like drifting through the night, touching the edges of wakefulness just enough to keep danger at bay. Modern researchers often debate how formal these patrol rotations were. Some suggest strict schedules, each adult taking a shift in turns. Others believe it was more fluid, with whoever felt most awake taking responsibility until their body relaxed enough to sleep. Without written documentation, these interpretations remain open, shaped by oral traditions and the physical traces left behind. But the effect is undeniable. Families slept, knowing someone always held the night's quiet in their palms. You lean against a tree trunk now, feeling the bark's rough ridges against your back. You imagine standing here as a watcher, letting the humidity cling lightly to your skin, listening to the world settle deeper into its nocturnal rhythm. You picture glancing occasionally toward the sleeping mats or hammocks tucked beneath the trees. Perhaps you see a child shifting in sleep, or hear the soft rumble of someone's breathing. Those small sounds would make the night feel lighter, grounding the watcher's presence with purpose. You step away and return to the center of the clearing. A faint breeze drifts through, carrying the smell of wet leaves and distant water. You lift your face to the night air and feel how stillness wraps itself around you. This calmness must have been the watcher's most treasured companion, not fear, not exhaustion, but the slow, easy cadence of a swamp breathing deeply. You walk slowly toward a narrow exit between trees. Before you leave, you look back one last time. The clearing feels like a held breath, a place shaped by vigilance but softened by quiet care. You imagine the watchers moving through it long ago, checking the camp gently, returning to their mats without waking others, letting sleep claim them in small waves. You step forward into the shadows. The night embraces you again, guiding you toward the next memory the swamp holds, another piece of the deep, dreaming wisdom woven into the darkness. You walk deeper into the swamp until the trees tighten around you again, their branches arching overhead like clasped fingers. The air cools slightly, carrying a thin mist that settles across your face in a soft veil. Here the night grows quieter, almost expectant, as though it is waiting for someone to open their eyes at dawn and speak the first sleepy words of the morning. This is where you begin to sense another intimate aspect of nighttime life, the way dreams shaped decisions, moods, and movements. The quiet art of dawn dream interpretation, woven gently into the rhythm of waking after long, humid hours of rest. You step onto a patch of ground where the soil feels smoother, pressed evenly by repeated use. This was likely a place where families gathered after rising, stretching their limbs and rubbing their eyes while the mist curled through the trees. You kneel and notice faint depressions in the earth, long arcs where someone may have sat, shorter marks where children might have crouched, and a small circular indentation that might have held a bowl of morning water. The quiet energy of waking lingers in these impressions, as though the earth itself remembers the slow shift from dreams to daylight. A detail described in several oral traditions from wetland communities notes that people often shared their dreams immediately upon waking, not loudly or ceremoniously, but in murmured conversations over morning tasks. Dreams were not dismissed as mere imagination. They were considered subtle messages shaped by the night's sounds, the body's sensations, and the movements of unseen forces drifting through the swamp. A dream involving rising water could prompt caution about travel routes. This is where you begin to sense another intimate aspect of nighttime life, the way dreams shaped decisions, moods, and movements. The quiet art of dawn dream interpretation, woven gently into the rhythm of waking after long, humid hours of rest. You sit on one of the shallow depressions and close your eyes, imagining what it felt like to rise here after a night of shifting humidity and soothing sounds. The first sensation would have been the cool touch of damp air against your skin, then the soft chorus of frogs and birds welcoming the dawn. Someone nearby would stir, stretching slowly. Another person would murmur, Did you dream? And the morning would begin not with chores but with reflection. You reach for a smooth stone lying near the depression. Its surface bears faint grooves, worn by countless fingertips. Some communities use stones like this as morning anchors, holding them while recalling the fragments of dreams before they faded. The stone's coolness grounded the dreamer, helping separate the dream world from the waking one. You rub your thumb along its surface and feel the sensation settle comfortably into your palm. A lesser-known detail from scattered accounts suggests that certain dreams were believed to be influenced by the swamp's own voice. If a dream echoed the rhythm of water or the beat of insects, it was seen as a sign that the sleeper had listened deeply to the land. Such dreams were thought to align the dreamer with the environment's mood, bringing harmony to the day ahead. A dream with jarring, broken images, however, might prompt someone to seek a different sleeping spot the next night, perhaps one with more airflow, or closer to a calming fire. You rise and walk toward a narrow clearing where sunlight begins to seep through the canopy in thin gold lines. Dew sparkles along the edges of leaves, and the air smells faintly of wet earth warming under early light. You imagine a family gathering here after waking, each person sharing a brief piece of their dream. One child describes floating through glowing water. Another recalls hearing a distant call. An elder listens patiently, nodding, then offers gentle interpretation. You stand where the elder might have stood. You can almost hear the calm voice. Water dreams this time of year remind us to watch the tides. Or perhaps a dream of fireflies means your spirit is light today. These interpretations were not rigid rules. They flowed like the swamp itself, fluid, symbolic, shaping mood rather than dictating action. The goal was not prophecy. It was connection. You step toward a leaning tree, whose bark carries faint signs of scoring. Thin diagonal lines cross each other in a pattern that might once have represented dream symbols. Some traditions describe marking trees with lines or small carvings to record dream patterns across seasons. Not literal stories carved in wood, but subtle reminders tracking dreams about animals, weather, or journeys. You touch the bark, feeling the grooves. They seem almost musical beneath your fingertips, like notes from a song only the morning air remembers. You walk around the tree and find a small patch of soft soil brushed smooth. Someone used this as a drawing ground. You kneel and drag a fingertip through the soil, imagining how a dreamer might draw the shape of a bird, a wave, or a rising moon. Such drawings helped them express what lingered from the night before words settled fully into their minds. Children might gather around to watch, asking questions that turned the morning into a shared reflection. Modern scholars discuss the role of these dawn interpretations with varied perspectives. Some argue that dreams served practical purposes, helping families anticipate weather, animal behavior, or emotional states. Others believe dream sharing strengthened social bonds, giving each person a space to be heard. A few suggest that dreams acted as a kind of emotional release, easing fears born from sleeping in such a wild, unpredictable landscape. Without written records, these discussions remain open, shaped by memory and ecological clues. You sit back on your heels and breathe in slowly. The swamp begins to glow with early morning light. The water reflects the sky in shimmering lines. Birds call in bright, rising notes. The night loosens its grip, letting the world stretch fully awake. You imagine a sleeper opening their eyes, remembering a dream of drifting through starlit water and feeling calm, connected, and ready for the day. You stand and let the mist swirl around your ankles. The dream world recedes, but its traces linger in the air like a soft hum. You take a final look at the etched bark, the drawing patch, the smooth stone. Then you step forward into the brightening swamp, carrying the quiet wisdom of dawn dreams with you. You walk slowly, letting the traces of dawn dreams settle behind you like fading mist. The swamp brightens in delicate shades of pale gold and soft green, and the air feels lighter, touched by the gentle warmth of early sunlight. As you move farther into the wetlands, the land begins to shift under your feet. The trees grow taller, their roots rising like pillars. The ground changes from soft, damp soil to firmer patches woven with fallen needles and dried leaves. This place carries the memory of another essential part of nighttime life: the way shelters evolved with the seasons, adjusting to insects, storms, humidity, and cold. Nothing in the swamp stayed the same, so the shelter designs changed too, becoming flexible answers to the shifting moods of nature. You step into a wider clearing, where the remnants of old structures stand like skeletal outlines on the earth. A faint perimeter of fallen branches marks the frame of a large seasonal shelter. Its edges are still visible, a long, curved line of sticks, some broken, some half buried in moss. You walk around the perimeter, noticing that the curve is wide and low. Shelters built for summer often had open sides, allowing breezes to flow through freely. Families needed airflow during hot months when humidity wrapped around the body like a second skin. Sleeping in enclosed spaces then would have been unbearable, trapping heat and inviting biting insects. So the summer shelters were airy, shaped to breathe. You crouch near one of the long fallen poles. When you touch its surface, you feel faint ridges where palm fronds once overlapped in a layered roof. A detail commonly shared in ethnographic accounts notes that people selected palm leaves for their ability to shed rain quickly and release heat through tiny gaps. During warm months, roofs were built lightly, sometimes with only a single layer of fronds. The intention was not insulation, but shade paired with ventilation. You imagine lying underneath such a shelter, listening to the rustle of fronds overhead as night wind moved gently through the swamp. You walk toward the back edge of the clearing, where a thicker, sturdier framework rises from the ground. These poles stand closer together, arranged more tightly than the ones before. Their placement suggests a different kind of shelter, one built for colder months, when the nights press down with unexpected chills. People living in wetlands needed to adjust not only to humidity but also to cold breezes that drifted over water during winter and early spring. The structures here were likely reinforced with bark, woven mats, or thick layers of dried grass mounted against the walls to trap heat. You run your fingers along a pole's curve and feel the grooves where layers of material once wrapped tightly around it. A lesser-known detail preserved in certain regional teachings reveals that shelters changed not just between seasons, but sometimes within a single month. Families monitored rainfall carefully. Heavy storms softened the ground, so sleepers moved to raised platforms built specifically for the wet season. You turn and spot the faint outline of a platform nearby, a square shape elevated by old, sturdy posts. These platforms kept bedding dry and out of the reach of rising water. They also provided a stable base above the mud when the swamp grew restless after storms. You approach the posts and run your palm across one. It leans slightly but still holds firm. The top shows faint marks where beams once joined, forming the frame for a floor made from interwoven branches. You imagine a family spreading reed mats across the platform surface, arranging sleeping spots in neat rows. Rain would fall hard on the roof above, splashing against the fronds, but underneath, the platform remained dry, lifted above the wet world. The sound of rain on the roof must have been soothing, especially after long days in humid conditions. You picture children drifting to sleep under its rhythm. You walk around the platform and notice another structure beyond it, a narrow corridor shape made from tightly spaced branches. Perhaps this space served as a transitional shelter, used when insects swarmed too heavily for open-air sleep. A thin layer of woven mesh might have hung across its entrance, keeping mosquitoes out while still allowing soft breezes to pass through. You run your fingers along a fallen beam and imagine the delicate netting once attached here, moving like a curtain in the night wind. A debate often discussed among researchers centers on how formal these seasonal structures were. Some propose that families rebuilt shelters entirely each year, taking advantage of fresh materials and adjusting designs according to shifting conditions. Others suggest that certain key posts remained year-round, forming permanent skeletons that families expanded and contracted as seasons demanded. The scattered remnants, you see some permanent, some temporary leave room for both interpretations. The swamp rarely gives definitive answers. It prefers stories woven from clues rather than certainty. You move toward a shaded corner where the trees lean closely together. Here, the ground is firmer and slightly elevated, suggesting use during the colder months. You kneel and notice fragments of woven bark scattered under the leaves. These pieces are thicker and heavier than summer fronds. They feel solid under your fingertips, each strip layered with the memory of insulation. When winter humidity turned into a crisp chill, families layered shelters with bark and grasses to keep warmth close to the body. At night, a small ember bowl might have glowed gently inside, its heat lingering in the enclosed space. You stand and walk through the remnants of another structure. The ground shows a faint trench dug in a circular path. This trench likely guided rainwater away from the sleeping area, a small but essential practice during the wettest months. Without it, water could seep into mats and bedding, chilling sleepers. You imagine someone using a simple stick to trace this trench at dusk, ensuring the ground stayed dry and steady. A soft breeze brushes your cheek. You look up and notice the tops of the trees swaying lightly. The motion makes you think of how shelters needed to flex and bend with wind rather than resist it. Lightweight frames adapted better to shifting weather. Even woven walls had slight give, their fibers stretching just enough to prevent snapping during sudden gusts. You continue walking until you reach the far side of the clearing, where a small arch of vine-covered posts stands in partial collapse. You lift one vine and study the post beneath it. This structure feels transitional, neither fully enclosed nor fully open. Its placement suggests use during seasons of unpredictability, those in-between months when the weather shifted quickly from hot to cool. Families needed flexible spaces then, shelters that could be opened wide for airflow or tightened for warmth. Vines, mats, and fronds could be added or removed easily, transforming the shelter in minutes. You step back and look across the clearing one more time. The ground carries the memory of multiple architectures overlapping through the years. You see open, breezy summer shelters, low, insulated winter spaces, raised platforms for rainy seasons, breezeways for insect-heavy months, flexible walls for transitional weather. The swamp demanded adaptability, and the people who slept here responded with creativity woven from materials at hand. You imagine a family waking here on different mornings throughout the year. In summer, they stretch beneath a wide, open roof, the early light warming their skin. In winter, they huddle in insulated walls, keeping embers glowing through dawn. During storms, they rest on raised platforms, listening to rain pound overhead. The shelters shift around them like the swamp's seasons, fluid, responsive, alive. You step away from the clearing, leaving behind the ghostly outlines of structures that once shaped countless nights. The swamp breathes softly around you as you walk, guiding you toward the final stretch of the story. Another dawn waits just ahead, threaded with the promise of departure, reflection, and the quiet calm that comes after a night's rest in the heart of the wetlands. You walk onward as the light grows stronger, shifting from pale silver to soft gold. The swamp around you begins to loosen its shadows. Mist lifts in thin ribbons, revealing pools that glimmer like polished glass. The insects quiet slightly, their chorus thinning as daylight approaches. You feel the world adjusting to morning, stretching and unfurling after a long night. This is the part of the journey where everything softens, where you sense how people once rose slowly, gathered their things, and prepared to leave the wetlands after a night of sleep, shaped by smoke, sound, rituals, and instinct. Leaving the swamp at sunrise was not abrupt. It unfolded in small, careful gestures that honored the place where they had rested. You step into a brightening corridor of trees. Their trunks appear clearer now, no longer silhouettes but textured pillars marked with moss, old scars, and faint carvings. The roots that once hid in darkness now show their ridges and hollows. You walk lightly between them, following a path worn smooth by bare feet over generations. The ground here tells a simple story. This was a morning route, a way out of the sleeping grounds toward open water, hunting trails, or more stable land for daytime tasks. You pause near a cypress stump and notice a scattering of crushed leaves. Someone once rested here upon waking, perhaps rubbing sleep from their eyes or stretching arms stiff from a humid night. A detail shared in many community memories describes how mornings in the swamp began with slow, deliberate motions. People didn't rise abruptly. They listened first. If the sounds around them felt calm, predictable water laps, gentle bird calls, steady insect hum, then it was safe to begin dismantling shelters or packing mats. You kneel beside the stump and lift one of the leaves. It still carries the faint imprint of a footprint. That single mark feels strangely intimate, as if the moment of waking remains preserved in the earth. You imagine a child standing here, blinking up at the light, clutching a small charm from the previous night's dream, or an elder bending slightly, murmuring something about the day's weather while listening to the wind. You continue walking until you reach a small rise where the swamp opens easily toward shallow water. This is where people often paused before traveling onward. You step onto the rise and feel the world widen around you. The sky blooms in soft peach and pale yellow. The water reflects it like a living mirror. A faint breeze stirs across the surface, carrying cool air into your lungs. It feels cleansing, like a sigh shared between land and light. A subtle detail preserved in early accounts suggests that families sometimes dipped their hands or faces in water before leaving their sleeping sites. Not as ritual cleansing, but as a way to wake the senses. The coolness brought clarity after hours spent in humid darkness. You kneel beside the water and dip your fingers in. The surface parts gently around your touch. When you lift your hand, droplets cling to your skin like tiny beads of morning light. You stand again and glance toward the opposite bank, where faint marks cut through the grass, dragging lines from canoes pulled onto shore. Some nights required arrival by boat, especially during flood months. You can almost hear the soft scrape of wood against wet ground. In the morning, those same boats would be slid back into the water with minimal noise, gliding through the early currents as families began their journeys. You follow the canoe marks inland and discover a faint series of grooves etched into the soil, arranged like guiding lines. These may have been used to align canoes for departure. A lesser-known detail passed down in regional teachings notes that people sometimes oriented their canoes according to morning wind. A properly aligned vessel caught the breeze just right, offering smoother travel through narrow channels. You run your palm along the grooves. They feel like quiet signatures left behind by countless travelers. You picture someone placing their foot firmly on the stern while another pushes gently from the bank. The canoe glides forward. The paddles break the surface in slow, even strokes. The morning carries them along with surprising ease. But before leaving entirely, there were always final touches to the sleeping site itself. You walk back toward an elevated patch of ground and see a scattering of charcoal, half hidden under leaves. People often covered fire pits before leaving scattering ash, smoothing earth, returning stones to natural positions, not as an attempt to erase their presence, but to ensure the place remained healthy, undisturbed, and safe for future nights. You kneel and press your hand to the cool earth, imagining someone performing similar gestures with quiet intention. You rise slowly and look around. The swamp now glows with calm morning light. Birds begin their day in gentle bursts of sound. Water shifts with slow movements as turtles rise toward the warming surface. The world feels open again, no longer cloaked by night's uncertainty. Modern scholars frequently discuss how morning routines reveal the deeper relationship between wetland communities and their environment. Some researchers highlight practical elements, efficient packing, adjusting position based on tides, coordinating with hunting routes. Others emphasize the emotional and symbolic aspects, small gestures that acknowledge the night as both companion and teacher. The truth likely rests between these views, shaped by daily experience and cultural rhythm. You take one more slow walk across the clearing, following the imaginary footsteps of those long gone, a mat being rolled tightly, a hammock lifted from its trees, a child rubbing berry paste from their arms, an elder checking the air for hints of weather, someone sipping the last mouthful of broth saved from the night before. All these moments blend into a soft tapestry of morning preparation.